The crate stopped rolling in a wash of yellow light, and every alien in the glass house took one step back at exactly the same time, as if they had rehearsed it. Del Mero did not step back. She crouched by the latch, thumbed the pin, and let the ramp fall with a flat clang against the resin floor. Above her, the great glass dome of the quarantine solarium poured noon down in wide, clean bars, and dust turned slow gold in the beams. Somewhere behind the observation glass, an alarm began to keen, a soft, rising, apologetic sound, the kind of alarm a very careful people build when they are more frightened of panic than of the thing that caused it. Nothing came out of the crate. "Give him a minute," Del said. She did not raise her voice. She rarely did. She sat back on her heels on the floor of an alien station, 400 light-years from the river she'd grown up beside, and she waited the way her grandmother had taught her to wait, with her hands loose and her breathing long. Then the dark came out of the crate. It came out the way weather comes, without hurry and without asking. First the long flat plate of the skull, the color of wet slate, the two eyes riding high in gold and half-lidded. Then the jaw closed, the teeth stitched along it like a fence somebody had built and then let the swamp grow over. Then the neck, the shoulders, the endless armored barrel of him, ridge after ridge of keeled scoot sliding down the ramp with a sound like a ship being launched. 5 meters and a little more. 600 kilos of animal that had been old when the station was drafted, that had been old, in fact, before 3 of the 7 governments watching him had signed their founding charters. The alarm's polite keen jumped an octave. Otto put his chin on the cool floor, sighed through his nostrils with a noise like a slow leak, and closed his eyes. Behind the glass, a robed official made a sound Del's translator rendered after a moment's hesitation, as a prayer. "He's tired," Del said, to nobody, to everybody. It was a long crate. She was 22 years old. She was small and plain and built like someone who had spent her life lifting things heavier than she was, which she had. Her coveralls were the gray of 100 washings, with a patch on the shoulder, a stylized river, a sun, that meant nothing to anyone here. Her hair was cropped short and going nowhere in particular. If you passed her in a corridor you would not look twice, and that, her grandmother used to say, was the whole trick of it. The dangerous ones are never the ones the room is watching. The room was watching the crocodile. The glass house was the pride of the conquered of settled worlds, and the conquered did not build ugly things. It was a biosphere the size of a small city folded into the sunward flank of Anzio Reach, a quarantine ring where the civilized galaxy inspected, catalogued, and licensed the living cargo of the deathworlds before it was ever allowed to touch a member soil. Rivers ran through it under real light. There were meadows in it and a lake, and stands of 100 imported trees kept behind soft blue fences. It smelled of green and ozone and the faint mineral tang of very clean water. It was the most beautiful cage Del had ever stood inside, and it had been built by people who were, underneath all that glass and grace, absolutely terrified. They had reason. The deathworld sent nightmares. Del had read the manifest of what had come through the glass house in the last standard year, the seed pods that grew teeth, the burrowing things from the ammonia worlds, the pack hunters from Kesh that had to be shipped frozen. The conquered received all of it with the same grave courtesy, weighed it and decided, world by world, what could be let in and what had to go back to the dark. They were not cruel about it. That was the thing Del kept having to remind herself. They were not cruel. They were only sure. And they were sure about Otto. Handler Mero. The voice came down from the observation gallery, smoothed and amplified, each word set down like a coin on a counter. "You will step away from the specimen." Del looked up. Behind the long curve of glass stood the delegation of the Directorate of Clean Worlds, and at the center of it, taller than the rest, pale as the inside of a shell, stood the one who had spoken. His name was Overseer Sethic Vaughn, and he was a Vril, one of the tall chitin-plated people of the inner systems, hairless, narrow, their skin the matte off-white of old bone, their eyes a smooth dark membrane with no visible white and no visible mercy, only attention. The Vril had built the directorate. The Vril had written the protocols. It was said, in the way stations say things, that a Vril had never in recorded history touched a living deathworld animal with a bare hand, and that this was not squeamishness but doctrine. Cleanliness of world, cleanliness of body, cleanliness of the line between the tame and the terrible. Vaughn wore the gray and silver of his office and a breathing filter across the lower plates of his face, and his hands, when he set them on the rail, wore gloves within gloves. "He's not going anywhere," Dell said. "You can come down." "We will not," said Vaughn, "be coming down." A ripple of agreement moved through the delegation. Somewhere a younger Vril, a junior warden, his plating still pale-edged and soft-looking at the joints, a shock lance held across his chest with both hands, leaned toward the glass and stared at Otto with the fixed, bright hatred of the newly frightened. "Then we'll do it from here," Dell said, and stood, and brushed the resin dust off her knees, and that was the last easy moment any of them would have for some time. The hearing was called a determination. That was the word on the manifest, on the summons, on the little glowing tab clipped to Dell's collar that told the station who she was and how afraid of her to be. A determination. The directorate would examine the specimen, weigh it against the schedule of permitted life, and determine whether it could be licensed onto conquered soil, returned to Earth, or the manifest used a gentle verb, and the gentleness was the worst of it, retired. They had already decided. Dell had known that before her boots touched the dock. You did not have to be clever to read it, you only had to watch how they moved. The Conquered had received 109 Earth animals in its history and licensed 40. Dogs mostly, a great many dogs, some horses, for a mining consortium that had learned to love them. Cats, when a station could be convinced, the cats would not simply leave. The rest had gone home, or gone into the gentle verb, and the ones that had gone into the gentle verb were, without exception, the predators. The Conquered had a long memory and a specific fear. It remembered the Kesh pack hunters. It remembered a thing from the salt flats of a world Dell had never seen that had unmade an entire licensing team in the length of a breath. It had built the directorate on the back of that memory, and the directorate had one article of faith above all others, and the article was this: an apex predator of a death world is not a companion. It is a weapon that has not yet been aimed. And Del Mero had walked off a transport with the largest apex predator any of them had ever seen, and called it, on the manifest, in the box for the specimen's relationship to the handler, a pet. "The word does not translate," Vaughn had said at the first session 3 days ago before Otto had even been decanted. He had said it the way a man says a thing is impossible while holding the proof in his hand. "Your form declares the specimen a companion animal, a domestic, this." A gesture at the sealed crate at the manifest at the whole impossible fact of her. "This is Crocodilus porosus. We have your own records, handler Mero. We have your own footage. We know precisely what this animal is. On your homeworld it is not a pet. On your homeworld, it is the reason certain rivers have no swimmers." "That's true," Dell had said. "It is an ambush predator that has not meaningfully changed its design in 100 million of your years, because the design does not require improvement. It does not bond. It does not obey. It tolerates its keeper the way still water tolerates the thing standing in it until it doesn't." "Also mostly true," Dell had said. "Then explain to this directorate," Vaughn had said, and for just a moment something had cracked the smooth membrane of his patience, something that might have been genuine bafflement or might have been fear wearing bafflement's coat. "Why you have brought it 400 light years, and why you have signed your own name in the box that makes you responsible for its behavior, and why you are not, at this moment, dead." Dell had thought about how to answer that. She had thought about her grandmother, Maud Mero, 70-odd years dead reckoned back up the family line, standing hip-deep in brown water with a hatchling the size of a shoe cupped in 2 hands, saying, "You don't tame them, girl. You just learn to be trustworthy and let them decide. She had thought about a great many things she was not going to say to a room full of frightened people who had already made up their minds. "Because he'd miss me," was what she'd said. They had adjourned early that day. Keeper Sarn watched the decanting from the low gallery, which was the wrong place to watch it from, which was exactly why he was there. He was not of the directorate. Belonged to the station's own small, unfashionable corps of beast keepers, the people who tended the living deterrents the conquered kept and did not like to talk about, the war beasts and the guard things, the apex animals of a dozen tamed worlds that stood at the doors of the station's most valuable rooms and made would-be thieves reconsider. Was of the Threll, a stocky, gray-furred, four-armed people from a heavy world, patient by nature and by trade, and he had spent 40 years learning the one thing the directorate refused on principle to learn, that a large predator up close is not a problem to be solved. It is a person to be met. He had come down to the low gallery to see the earth animal because the manifest had made his fur stand up, and he had wanted to know why. Now he knew, and he wished he didn't. It was not the size. Tended things larger than the crocodile. It was not the teeth, though the teeth were a serious argument. It was the way the animal had come down the ramp. Had watched 10,000 animals leave 10,000 crates, and they all did one of two things. They came out afraid, low and fast and looking for the exits, or they came out angry, which is only afraid with the sign flipped. He had never, in 40 years, seen one come out the way the crocodile came out. It came out like a landlord. It had put its chin on the floor of a strange room on a strange station under a strange sun, and it had gone to sleep, and it had done this because. And felt the understanding arrive in his chest like cold water, because nothing in the room was worth staying awake for. The animal had assessed the largest concentration of armed authority in this sector of the conquered. The alarms, the shock lances, the drop shutters, the sealed doors, the gathered might of the Directorate of Clean Worlds, and it had filed all of it under the same heading, and the heading was not a threat. Sarn, the voice at his shoulder belonged to his second, a younger thrall named Oval. Oval's lower hands were pressed flat to the gallery rail, and his fur was up in ridges. The Directorate wants Ord brought up. Did not look away from the sleeping crocodile. For what? For the demonstration. Session tomorrow. They want to establish, the phrasing was a baseline of interspecies dominance. To see how the Earth animal responds to a recognized apex under station control. Oval swallowed. They want to put Ord in the room. Ord was the station's sable drog, 2.5 tons of armored, patient death from the terraces of Vault, the single most dangerous licensed animal aboard Anzio Reach, and the only creature had ever loved without reservation. He had raised Ord from a blind cub. He knew to the gram what Ord could do to a room. He looked at the crocodile, asleep in the noon light with its chin on the floor, and for the first time in 40 years, Sarn felt afraid for his own beast. "Tell them no," he said. "Sarn, tell them no, tell them the keeper declines, tell them I'll put it in writing." He turned from the rail. "And find out everything you can about the girl, not the animal, the girl, where she learned it, who taught her, what she brought in her luggage." He stopped. "And Oval, if the Directorate insists on Ord, if they overrule me, you keep the release in your own hand, not theirs. If it goes wrong, I want a threll finger on the catch, not a virile one. Do you understand me?" Oval did not understand him. That was all right. Did not fully understand himself yet. He only knew, with the flat certainty of a man who had spent his life reading animals, that the most dangerous thing in the glass house was asleep on the floor with its eyes closed, and that the second most dangerous thing was the small quiet human standing beside it, and that between them they had already, without raising voice or claw, taken control of a room that did not yet know it had been taken. They gave Dell a cell they called a residence. It was clean and gray and warm, and it had a window, and through the window she could see down into the glass house where Otto lay in his patch of sun beside the little river they'd let him have. They had strung a fence of soft blue light around him. He ignored it. He had been ignoring fences his whole life. Dell sat on the floor with her back against the wall, because the alien furniture was built for spines she didn't have, and she opened the cardboard box. It was, by every measure, the least remarkable object in the glass house. It was a cardboard box. It had come from a shipping depot in Darwin, and it had a coffee ring on one flap and a strip of packing tape gone amber with age, and it had traveled 400 light-years wedged between Dell's spare boots and a bag of Otto's supplements, and the Concord scanners had opened it at the border, looked inside, found no weapon and no contraband and no living thing, and closed it again and stamped it and thought no more about it. Dell thought about it a great deal. She lifted the flaps. Inside, wrapped in a square of gray wool blanket that had once been a different gray, was a thing about the size of a melon, an old net float, cork and canvas, the kind fishermen had strung along the tops of their nets before there were better ways to do it. It was sun-bleached to the color of bone. The canvas had been chewed once, long ago, and mended, and chewed again, and mended so many times that the mending was most of what was left. On one flat face of it, in ink gone soft and brown, were two letters, M.M. Maud Marrow, Dell's grandmother, dead 11 years now, buried on a rise above the river, and this stupid, priceless, irreplaceable lump of cork the only thing of hers Dell had brought. It was not hers exactly, it was Otto's. Maud had given it to him the year she'd pulled him out of the water, a hatchling the length of a hand, the last survivor of a nest the colors had gotten to. She'd wrapped him in the wool and set the float in the box with him because a hatchling wants something to hide under, and Otto had wrapped himself around the float and refused, ever after, to be parted from it. He'd carried it in his jaws across the yard when he was young. He'd slept curled around it in the mud every night of his long life. When Maud died, and it fell to Dell, 19, terrified, suddenly the keeper of the family's oldest and largest responsibility, the one thing that had made Otto sit still through the worst of that first year was the float. She'd set it in his enclosure and he'd folded himself around it, and something in the great slate engine of him had gone quiet, and Dell had sat down in the mud beside 600 kilos of grief and put her hand flat on his flank, and they had gotten through it together. She wrapped the float back up in the blanket. She did not take it down to him tonight. He knew where it was. He could smell it through cardboard and blanket and the whole recycled atmosphere of the station. She was sure of that. He would wait. He was extraordinarily good at waiting. It was, when you got down to it, the only thing his kind had ever really needed to be good at. She put the box beside her on the floor where she could reach it, and she leaned her head back against the alien wall, and she watched her crocodile sleep in a square of borrowed sun, and she thought about the word they kept snagging on. Ped. They were right that it didn't translate. They were right about almost everything: the directorate, the ambush design, the 100 million years, the rivers with no swimmers. They had the footage and the records, and they had read them correctly. Otto was every terrible thing they said he was. That was the part they couldn't get past, and it was the part that made Dell, sitting on the floor of her cell, tired down to the bone. They thought the terror and the tameness were opposites. They thought you had to choose. Her grandmother had never chosen. Her grandmother had stood in the brown water with the most efficient predator the earth had ever built, and she had not tamed it, and she had not feared it, and she had not lied to herself for one single day about what it could do to her. She had just been trustworthy, every day, for as long as it took, and let the animal decide. And the animal had decided. That was the thing none of them could hear, because it broke the article of faith. The animal had decided. "Tomorrow they're bringing a monster to scare you," Dell said, to the window, to the shape in the sun. "You be nice to it." Otto did not open his eyes, but the tip of his tail moved once in the water, a slow, deliberate skull, there and gone. He'd heard her. He always heard her. Dell pulled the gray blanket that wasn't the floats off the alien cot, and lay down on the floor with the box near her head, and slept better than anyone else on Ancio Reach that night. They overruled Keeper Sarn, of course. The Directorate did not overrule him rudely. The Conquered did nothing rudely. A courteous notice arrived in Eo's queue at the 4th hour, thanking him for his professional counsel, noting it, and setting it aside in favor of the higher interest of the determination. The demonstration would proceed. The sable drog would be walked into the glasshouse under Keeper control at the 6th hour, and the Directorate would observe how the Earth specimen comported itself in the presence of a recognized apex, and from this, it would establish the baseline it required. Eo read the notice twice, then he went down to Ord. Ord lived in a vault 3 levels below the glasshouse, a great cool room of black stone that Eo had insisted on because the drog came from a world of caves and would fret in the light. The beast rose when the door cycled, rose the way a landslide rises when you play it backward, 2.5 tons of low armored muscle gathering itself off the floor without apparent effort, the wide blunt head swinging toward him, the 6 slit nostrils flaring to take his scent. Ord's hide was the color of old iron and laid over with plates a hand thick. Ord had 4 eyes and a jaw that unhinged and a disposition, toward everyone in the universe except Eo Sarn, of grave and total lethality. Eo had watched Ord end a licensing dispute once, years ago, when a smuggling crew had decided the station's beast was a bluff. It had not been a bluff. Eo still dreamed about the sound. "Hello, old terror," Eo said, in the Threll dialect he used only for the beast, and put all 4 hands flat against the great warm plate of Ord's cheek. The drog leaned into it, a pressure that would have crushed a lesser man to paste, gentle as a cat. "They want to take you upstairs. They want to show the Earth thing what you are." Eo pressed his forehead to the beast's snout. "I don't think it's going to go how they think." He walked Ord up himself. He would not give the release to anyone else. He kept the tether, a formality, a length of woven monofil that Ord could have parted with a shrug and never had, because Ord had decided long ago that Eo's hand on the other end of it meant something. He kept the tether short, and he walked his beast into the noon light of the glasshouse, and he felt the great body under his hands do something it had never done in 15 years. He felt Ord hesitate. Del was sitting cross-legged on the resin floor when they brought the war beast in, and she got the whole thing at eye level. She'd asked to be down on the floor. The Directorate had wanted her behind glass, and she declined politely, and cited a handler's clause in their own regulations about maintaining specimen calm through keeper presence, and they checked the clause and found she was right, which had not pleased them. So she sat on the floor near Otto's river with her hands loose on her knees, and Otto lay half in and half out of the water 3 meters away with his eyes closed, and the far doors opened, and the station's nightmare came through them. She heard the Directorate delegation go quiet behind their glass. She heard the junior warden with the shock lance make a small approving sound, the sound of a frightened person watching a bigger frightened thing arrive on his side. She watched the sable drog come out into the light, low and vast and iron dark, its keeper small and gray beside it with a tether that both of them clearly understood to be decorative, and she thought, "Oh, he's beautiful." And then she thought, "Oh, he's terrified," and she felt sorry for it, the way you feel sorry for a big dog barking itself hoarse at something in the dark. Because the drog had scented Otto by now. Del watched it happen. The wide blunt head came up, the nostrils working, and the beast's 4 eyes found the long dark shape at the water's edge, and every plate along its spine stood up and it stopped. Its keeper stopped with it. The gray Threll put a hand on the great shoulder and said something low, and the beast did not move. "Handler Marrow," Vaughn's voice from the gallery smooth and certain. "The station's apex will now approach the specimen. Do not interfere. We wish to observe the natural interaction." "Okay," Del said. She did not move. Neither did Otto. He had not opened his eyes. The drog took 1 step toward the water, then another. It was a magnificent thing, that approach, the sheer controlled power of it, the ground seeming to tighten under each footfall, the head lowered and the jaw beginning, very slightly, to gape. In 15 years it had made this walk perhaps 40 times, toward smugglers and toward test animals, and once toward a man who'd drawn a weapon in the wrong room. And every one of those 40 times the walk had ended the same way, because the walk was a language and the language had one word in it, and the word was final. 6 meters out, Otto opened his eyes. He did not lift his head. He did not move his body at all. He simply opened his eyes, the 2 gold lamps of them coming up out of the slate of his skull, and he looked at the drog. The drog stopped, as if it had walked into the glass. Del heard the keeper make a sound. She heard, behind the observation wall, the directorate go utterly silent, 40 light years of accumulated authority holding its breath. And she watched the most dangerous licensed animal on Anzio Reach stand at the edge of a little artificial river and understand, all at once, in the wordless bone-deep grammar that predators have spoken to one another since before there were governments to license them, exactly what it was looking at. It was looking at something older. It was looking at something that had been doing this longer. It was looking at a design so ancient and so complete that its own kind, formidable as they were a recent and provisional experiment by comparison. And it knew, the way water knows down, that if the ancient thing at the water's edge ever decided to close the distance, there would be no walk, no language, no final word. There would only be the water, and then the stillness, and then nothing. Otto yawned. It was not a threat. That was the thing Del knew, and the directorate would spend the rest of the day failing to understand. It was a real yawn, wide and unhurried and frankly bored, the great pale cave of his mouth opening to its full and appalling extent, every one of those 66 teeth catching the noon light, the ridged throat working, and then it closed softly with a small wet sound, and he settled his chin a centimeter deeper into the mud and let his eyes drift most of the way shut again. The drog lay down. It did not retreat, which would have cost it too much. It did not attack, which it now understood to be a category error on the order of biting the sun. It simply lowered its 2.5 tons to the resin floor, 6 meters from the crocodile, and put its blunt head down between its foreclaws, and became, in the space of a breath, the second largest sleeping animal in the room. "Good lad," Del heard the gray keeper murmur, and the relief in it was enormous. Behind the glass, no one said anything for a long time. Overseer Sethic Vaughn stood at the rail of the gallery and watched his baseline die. He was a creature of protocol, and he was honest enough in the privacy of his own plated skull to know why. His people did not fear the deathworlds because they were weak. The Vril had crossed to this station on ships they had built with their own hands. They had terraformed 4 worlds. They had buried in the long memory that every Vril child inherited the exact and unforgotten record of the Sethan Cull, the season 200 years gone when a single imported predator, licensed by a careless and now abolished authority, had gotten loose in the crash decks of a colony ship and been among the young for the length of a night. There had been no footage. The Vril did not keep footage of that. They kept only the number, and they taught the number to every warden who ever wore the gray, and the number was the reason the directorate existed, and the reason Vaughn's gloves had gloves. So he did not enjoy this. He wanted it understood, at least by himself, that he did not enjoy this. He was not a cruel administrator gloating over a doomed animal. He was a frightened man doing a frightening job as carefully as it could be done. And the job was to look at the largest apex predator ever offered to the conquered and determine, on behalf of 900 billion souls who trusted the directorate to keep the terrible on the far side of the glass, whether it could be let in. And the answer was obvious. The answer had been obvious from the manifest. The answer was no. He had come to this session confident of 2 things. First, that the demonstration would prove the specimen's lethality beyond the ability of any handler's claws to explain away, and would let him write retirement into the record with a clean conscience. Second, that the human, when she finally understood what her attachment had condemned, would break, would weep or plead or rage, all of which he had prepared himself to withstand. Instead, the Draug was asleep on the floor, and the human was sitting cross-legged 3 meters from 600 kilos of ambush predator with her hands loose on her knees and her plain small face turned up toward the light. And she was not weeping, and she was not pleading, and she had, Vaughn realized with a slow cold turning in his gut, not looked up at the gallery once during the entire demonstration. She had not needed to see how it went. She had known how it would go. Overseer. His junior warden, Kesh Ulro, spoke close at his shoulder, low and urgent, the shock lance still gripped white-knuckled across his chest. Ulro was young and his plating was soft, and he had lost someone to a licensed animal in a border incident 2 years back, which was why Vaughn had chosen him, because Vaughn believed a warden should feel the weight of the doctrine in his own body. Now Ulro's voice shook with something Vaughn recognized and did not like. Overseer, the station beast lay down for it, in front of everyone. That's, the record will show our own Apex submitted to an unlicensed import. If that gets out. It will get out, Vaughn said. It is already out. There are 7 governments watching this feed. Then we have to act. We have to establish control. Before the specimen, before it teaches the whole station that the directorate's own beast bows to. Warden Ulro. Vaughn did not raise his voice. He had learned over a long career that the quieter a Vril spoke the more a room attended, and he wanted this room to attend. You will keep your lance across your chest and your feet on this gallery, and you will not, under any circumstance, go down onto that floor. Is that understood? Overseer. Is that understood? A pause. Understood. It was not understood. Vaughn could hear that it was not understood, and he filed it away with the growing pile of things he would have to manage before this determination was through, and he turned back to the glass, and he made himself look, really look, at the small human on the floor of his beautiful, terrible garden. She had taken something out of her pocket, a small flat object. His optics resolved it as a fragment of dried plant matter, a leaf of something, brown and curled. She was turning it over in her fingers idly, the way a person handles a worry stone. And the crocodile, without opening its eyes, without lifting its head, had shifted, a small thing, a hand's width. But Vaughn's optics caught it, had shifted its bulk a few centimeters closer to her along the mud, closing the distance between them from 3 meters to a little less, and had gone still again. The most efficient predator either of their species had ever recorded had just moved to be nearer to her. Not to strike, to be nearer, the way a thing moves toward warmth. Vaughn had spent 40 years building a wall between the tame and the terrible, and he stood at the glass and felt the first hairline crack run through it, and he was honest enough, in the privacy of his plated skull, to be afraid of what he might see through the gap. Adjourn the session, he said. We resume tomorrow. I want the full specimen file, the human's full history, and I want, he stopped. He had been about to ask for the contents of her luggage, and he remembered that the scanners had already given him that 3 days ago and that it had been nothing. Spare boots, supplements, a box of personal effects, no living matter, no contraband, cleared and stamped. I want the manifest of her personal effects pulled and read to me, everything, every item. Sir, Ulro baffled. The effects cleared border, there was nothing in them. There is always something in them, Vaughn said, and did not know yet why he'd said it, only that the human's calm had the shape of a thing that was waiting, and that people did not wait like that with empty hands. Sarn walked Ord back down to the vault himself, and the beast went quietly, and at the door of the black stone room the Draug did a thing it had never done. It stopped, and turned its great head back toward the lift, back up toward the glass house and the sun and the sleeping crocodile 3 levels above, and it made a sound, low, subsonic, felt in the floor more than heard, that Io had catalogued exactly twice in 15 years. Once when Ord's own dam had died. Once at a passing warship of the Threll home fleet, when the beast had somehow known, across vacuum, that its own kind was near. It was the sound Ord made for elders. "I know," Io said softly, and let the beast into its cool dark room and stood a while in the doorway watching it settle. "I know, old terror. I felt it too." Then he went to find the girl, because he had questions, and because he had begun to suspect that the only person on Ancio Reach who understood what was actually happening was a 22-year-old human sitting on the floor of a garden built by the frightened, and he wanted, very badly, to be told he was wrong. He was not going to be told he was wrong, but he wanted to hear it anyway. He found her in the glass house after the sun panels had dimmed to their evening amber, sitting on the bank of Otto's little river with her boots off and her feet in the water, which was either the bravest or the most foolish thing Io Sarn had seen in 40 years, and he genuinely could not decide which. The crocodile lay along the bank beside her, most of him in the water, one foreleg out on the mud. His eyes were closed. His flank rose and fell with the slow tide of a very large animal at rest, and her hip was against that flank, leaning on it the way you'd lean on a warm wall, and neither of them so much as twitched when Io's 4 feet found the resin. "You're the keeper," Del said without turning around, "the one who declined." Io stopped. "You saw the notice." "No, but somebody up there fought them about bringing your beast in. You could hear it in how careful they were being when they overruled it." She patted the water off one foot and drew it up. "That's a person who cares about their animal. Figured I'd meet you eventually." She turned her head then and looked at him, and Io found the human face harder to read than any beast's, but the eyes were steady and tired and not afraid of him at all. "You did right, by the way, trying to keep him out of here. You know what he is." Io lowered himself to the bank a careful distance off, 4 limbs folding. "Ord, my beast." "Sable Drog," the tab said, "from Vault." She said the name of the world gently, the way you'd handle something breakable. "He's gorgeous, and he was scared to death, poor lad. I felt terrible for him." "You felt terrible," Io repeated, "for the most dangerous licensed animal in this sector. He's a long way from home, and they made him walk up to something his whole body was screaming at him to run from, and he did it anyway because you asked him to." Del looked back at the water. "That's not a monster. That's a good soldier following a bad order, same as half the people behind that glass." Io was quiet a moment. Overhead the amber light thickened toward the station's simulated dusk, and the imported trees stirred in an imported wind, and the great slate shape at the girl's hip breathed and breathed. "He lay down for yours," Io said finally. "Ord, he has never lain down for anything. I have walked him at King's." "I need you to tell me why." "Because Otto's older." Del said it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, which Io was coming to understand to her it was. "Older than your drog's whole line, probably. Older than most things. His kind figured out how to do this," she nodded at the water, "at the low armored length of him, before the dinosaurs, and then they watched the dinosaurs come and the dinosaurs go, and they didn't change a thing, because they'd already got it right. Your Ord's a beautiful animal and he's apex on his world, but apex is a local title." She smiled, small and dry. "Otto's not local to anywhere. He's just old. And your boy took one look and knew it in his bones, the way you'd know it if a mountain sat up. And you," Io turned his 4 eyes on her, "you put your feet in the water with the mountain." "He'd never hurt me." "You cannot know that." "No," Del agreed. "I can't. That's the part your directorate can't hear, so I'll try it on you because you're a keeper and maybe you can." She pulled her feet up out of the river and wrapped her arms around her knees, small and plain in the amber light. "I can't make him not able to hurt me. Nobody could. He could take my arm off between one breath and the next, and there is not a thing in this station or on my world that could stop him. That's true. The directorate's got that part exactly right, and they think it settles the question, and it doesn't even start it." She looked at the sleeping animal with an expression Io had no word for in any of his 4 languages. "The whole thing, the whole entire thing, the thing my grandmother spent her life on and I've spent mine on, is that he could and he doesn't. Every single day he could, and he doesn't. That's not the absence of danger, Keeper. That's the presence of somebody choosing. Every day he wakes up next to the one animal in the universe that can't defend itself against him, and every day he chooses me. You take that away, you say it's just a tame thing, a safe thing, a thing that can't, and you haven't made it kinder. You've made it nothing. You've thrown away the only real thing in the whole arrangement. The amber light hummed, the crocodile breathed. Eo Sarn, 40 years a keeper, sat on the bank and felt something turn over in his chest that he would spend a long time afterward trying to name. They're going to retire him, he said quietly. You know that. The demonstration only made it worse. Their own beast bowed on a live feed to 7 governments. Vaughn cannot let that stand. He'll need the record to end with your animal contained or gone, or the whole doctrine cracks, and the doctrine is the only thing between 900 billion frightened people and a fear they've carried 200 years. Eo spread his lower hands. I am not defending it. I am telling you the shape of the wall you're pushing on. I know the shape of the wall. Dell rose and gathered her boots and stood on the bank with the water darkening behind her. They'll give me one more session. They'll want a demonstration of control, a muzzle, a restraint, proof I can make him not be what he is, and I'm going to give them a demonstration instead. She looked at Eo, and there was something in the plain, tired face that made the old keeper's fur lift along his spine. Not the one they're asking for, a better one. Will you be there? I will be ordered to be there. Good, bring your ord if they let you, she almost smiled. He should see it. He'll understand it better than any of them. She walked away up the bank in her sock feet with her boots in her hand, small and unhurried, and behind her the crocodile opened one gold eye, watched her go until she reached the door, and then closed it again and slept. The manifest of Handler Delphine Marrow's personal effects was read to Overseer Vaughn at the 2nd hour of the morning, and it was, as Warden Ulro had promised, nothing. Item 1 pair boots spare human worn. Item nutritional supplement veterinary 40 units cleared. Item 1 container fibrous cellulose packaging, the reader's term for a cardboard box. Contents personal effects non-living non-hazardous. Item sublist 1 textile wool degraded. 1 object cork and canvas composite degraded non-functional of no determinable purpose. Cleared, stamped, border passed. Vaughn made the reader repeat the last item twice. 1 object cork and canvas composite, said the reader, a soft-voiced clerk of a species that did nothing but read. Degraded, non-functional. Of no determinable purpose. A tool. The scan found no mechanism, Overseer. No power source, no edge, no reservoir. It is inert organic matter shaped into a rough sphere and repaired many times. Repaired, Vaughn turned the word over, by whom? Unknown. The repairs are old. Some are very old. The materials of the repairs do not all match. It appears to have been mended over a long period by more than one hand. A cork sphere, mended over a lifetime by more than one hand, carried 400 light-years by a woman who owned almost nothing and had chosen to bring it. Vaughn sat with that for a while, in the gray hour, and could make nothing of it, and disliked intensely the feeling of being unable to make anything of it. He was a man whose whole life was the sorting of things into their proper boxes. Here was a thing that fit no box, carried by a woman who fit no box, in the keeping of an animal that fit no box, and the not fitting had begun, he admitted to himself, to keep him awake. He was still awake, in fact, when Warden Ulro did the thing that changed everything. Dell was not in the glass house when it happened. She heard about it the way you hear about weather, a change in the air of the station, a tightening. She had gone back to her cell to sleep and been woken at the 4th hour by the soft rising apologetic alarm, and by the time she got a door to open for her and ran the long curved corridor down to the observation gallery, it was already over, and the gallery was full of Verl standing very still. Here is what she pieced together, later, from Eo and from the feed. Warden Kesh Ulro had not slept either. Ulro had sat up through the gray hours with the shock lance across his knees and the feed of the sleeping crocodile on his slate and the number. The directorate's number, the Sethin number, the Kreshdex and the long night, running behind his eyes, and somewhere in those hours the young warden had made a decision that felt, Dell was sure, like courage. He had decided that the directorate was too slow and too frightened of its own feed to do what plainly needed doing, and that a warden who truly served the doctrine would establish control before the specimen taught the whole station to stop being afraid. He had decided, in short, to prove the animal was what he knew it to be. He had gone down onto the floor of the glass house alone, at the 4th hour, with a shock lance, and he had walked up on the sleeping crocodile to set the lance against its hide and light it up, and film what the animal did, and enter into the record the truth that the demonstration had failed to capture. He got to within 4 meters. No one saw the crocodile move. That was the part that was in every account, Eos and the feeds and the 3 other wardens who had come running. No one saw it move. One instant Otto was a dark shape at the water's edge with his chin on the mud, 4 meters off, asleep. The next instant he was not there, and Warden Ulro was on the ground on his back with the breath knocked out of him, and the shock lance was in 2 pieces a body length apart, the metal of it sheared clean through as if it had been a reed, and the crocodile was between the warden and the water, Sidon, unhurried, already settling, already lowering his chin back toward the mud, his gold eye rolling once toward the fallen Virl and then away, dismissing him, the way you'd dismiss a chair you'd walked into in the dark. Ulro was not hurt. That was the thing the directorate could not get past in the hours that followed, could not fit into any box. The warden was not hurt. He had a bruise across his back plates where he'd gone down and a filter knocked askew and a fright that would, Eo said, likely retire him from the Corps on its own. But there was not a mark on him from the animal. The animal had not touched him. The animal had crossed 4 meters faster than 4 trained observers could track, taken the one dangerous object out of the equation, put its own body between the threat and the girl's crocodile's water, and left the frightened young man who had come to hurt it entirely, pointedly, contemptuously alone. It had addressed the lance. It had not addressed the hand that held it. He made a choice, Dell said later in the gallery to Vaughn, who had sent for her and who stood now at the glass looking down at the sleeping shape as if it were a word in a language he had been certain, until an hour ago, that he could read. Your warden went down there to hurt him. Otto could have ended it. You know he could, you all just watched how fast he is, and that's an old animal, that's not even him quick. He could have ended your warden and there is nothing any of you could have done. And he took the lance and put it in 2 pieces and let the man go. Dell's voice did not rise. It never did. That's twice now you've seen it and called it something else. Your drog bowed and you called it a malfunction of the demonstration. He spared your warden and you're going to call it luck, or the animal not being hungry, or some ethological accident. You're going to write it down as an accident because the alternative breaks your wall. Vaughn did not answer for a long moment. Down on the floor, in the first gray light of the panels warming toward dawn, the crocodile slept, and 3 meters from it, a bruised young warden sat on the resin where the medics had left him, refusing to be moved, staring at the animal that had spared him with an expression Vaughn could not read and did not want to. What is the alternative? Vaughn said at last, quietly, not quite a challenge, almost, Dell thought, a real question. The alternative, Dell said, is that he decides, same as I keep telling you. He looked at a frightened kid who'd come to burn him, and he decided the kid wasn't worth it, and he decided the lance was, and he did exactly and only what the situation required and not 1 gram more. Your directorate's whole fear is that he's a weapon that hasn't been aimed. She turned from the glass and looked up at the tall, pale, frightened administrator, and her plain face was very calm. He's not a weapon, Overseer. A weapon can't spare anybody. That's the whole difference, and you've been staring at it for 2 days. The directorate convened in full that afternoon, and for the first time in the determination, it convened afraid of the wrong thing. Vaughn sat at the head of the long table in the sealed chamber above the glass house and watched his colleagues arrive, and he read them the way the human read her animal, by how they moved. They were frightened still. They had been frightened from the first manifest, but the shape of the fear had changed overnight, and Vaughn, who had built his career on the precise cartography of institutional fear, felt the change and did not like where it was heading. Before, they had feared the animal, a clean fear, a doctrinal fear, the fear the directorate was built to hold and channel and act upon. You could write policy against that fear. You could retire the source of it and sleep. Now they feared the record. 7 governments watched our apex lie down, said Overseer Threnu of the Water Worlds, folding her long fingers. 7 governments watched a directorate warden go onto the floor against standing orders and be spared, publicly spared. The Kesh delegation has already filed a query. The Muri scholars are calling it, and I quote the Intercept, a datum of the first importance. Do you understand what that means, Sethic? They are not frightened. The Muri are curious. They want to study it. They want to license it precisely because our beast bowed to it. Because it is the first thing in 400 years to make a sable drog lie down, and the Muri would give a moon to know why. The Muri would give a moon to dissect it, said Warden Superior Osk, who ran the containment corps and had wanted the animal dead since the crate. Which is what should have been done at the border. This is a security determination, not a scholarly curiosity. The animal crossed 4 meters faster than 4 trained observers could resolve. It sheared a shock lance. It is exactly, precisely, to the specification, the thing the doctrine exists to keep out. I do not care that it spared Ulro. A predator that can choose to spare, can choose not to. You have all made the girl's argument for her, and you have made it backward. Its restraint is not a comfort. Its restraint is proof of control, and the control does not belong to us. It belongs to a 22-year-old human and a rope of instinct we cannot see, cannot measure, and cannot license. Osk set both hands flat on the table. I move retirement. Today. Before it teaches this station one more lesson we cannot afford. The chamber murmured. Vaughn let it murmur. He was thinking about a cork sphere mended by more than one hand. There is a difficulty with retirement, said Overseer Threnu, into the murmur, and something in her tone made the table still. I have had the corps model it, at Warden Superior Osk's own request, in fact. A glance at Osk, who did not look pleased. We modeled the retirement of the specimen, the methods available to us, the sedative lance, the containment gas, the drop shutter, and the flooding of the enclosure. We modeled each against the specimen's demonstrated speed, mass, and restraint. Would the panel like to hear the outcomes? No one said yes. Threnu told them anyway. Every model that succeeds, she said, requires the animal to be asleep and unwarned. Everyone. If it is awake, if it is warned, if it has 1 full second of intent to read, and it reads intent, Sethic. We have watched it read intent twice now. Then the core assessment is that any retirement attempt inside this station carries an unacceptable probability of the animal reaching the handler, the keeper core, or this chamber before the method completes. Not certainty, probability. But the probability is not small, and the core will not sign the order. She folded her hands again. So, we may retire it in its sleep treacherously on a live feed before 7 watching governments, having spent 3 days establishing on that same feed that the animal has done nothing but sleep, bow, and spare a man who came to burn it. Or we may not retire it at all. Those are the options the modeling leaves us. I would be glad to be told I have modeled it wrong. No one told her she had modeled it wrong. Vaughn looked down the long table at his frightened, careful, honorable colleagues, and he understood that the wall had a shape none of them had planned for. They could not license the animal without breaking the doctrine. They could not retire the animal without breaking themselves, without the whole conquered watching the Directorate of Clean Worlds murder a sleeping creature that had, on the record, harmed no one, and doing it out of a fear the record no longer supported. Either way the wall cracked. The only question left was which way it fell, and how many of them it took down. There is a third path, Vaughn said. The table turned to him. The handler has requested a final session. She has asked to make a demonstration, not the one we required. He had the request in front of him in her own plain phrasing, submitted through Keeper Sarn. We required a demonstration of control, restraint of the animal, muzzling, proof of the handler's dominance. She declines to give us that. She proposes instead to demonstrate. The word does not translate cleanly, trust. She proposes to show this panel and the 7 governments something that will, she says, answer the question of the animal's nature in a way none of us can argue with. And you would let her? Osk's voice was flat. After everything, you would give the human the floor and the feed and let her stage whatever theater she has planned. I would, Vaughn said. Let the record be complete. He rose. He was very tired, and he was, underneath the tiredness, afraid in a new way, the way a man is afraid on the morning he suspects he has been wrong about something load-bearing. We have spent 3 days building a record that says this animal is a weapon. The animal has spent 3 days building a different record with the same footage. If we retire it now, we retire it into that contradiction, and the contradiction outlives us. The Muri will worry it like a bone for a century, and every future handler who brings us a hard case will point at it. Or, he set his gloved hands on the table, gloves within gloves. Or we let the human make her demonstration. If it fails, if the animal is what the doctrine says, then it fails on the feed in front of everyone and the retirement rights itself and no one questions it. And if it succeeds... He stopped. If it succeeds, said Threnu quietly, then we have all seen something, and we must decide what to do about having seen it. Yes, Vaughn said. Then we have all seen something. He looked out through the chamber's tall window, down into the green and the amber and the little river, where the largest apex predator any of them had ever recorded lay asleep in a borrowed patch of sun with its chin on the mud. I have spent 40 years keeping the terrible on the far side of the glass. I would like, before I write the order that ends this, to be certain which side of the glass the terrible is actually on. Convene the session. Full feed. All 7 governments, tomorrow at noon under the light. He turned from the window. And someone bring me the item from her effects, the cork one, the one of no determinable purpose. I find I want to see it before she does whatever she is going to do with it. They did not bring it to him. It was not, it turned out, in her effects any longer. The clerk who went to fetch it found the container in her cell empty of the wool and the sphere both, and reported this to Vaughn, who received the report standing at his window, and who found that he was not surprised, and who stood a while longer looking down at the sleeping animal and the small dark box that had appeared, some time in the night, on the bank of the little river beside it, just out of the water, just within the reach of one gold eye. Dell spent the last night the way she'd spent the first, on the floor of the glass house, her back against Otto's flank, the box beside her. She had carried it down herself after the corridors emptied. No one had stopped her. She thought perhaps no one dared, which was a strange thing to be able to count on, and a lonely one. Big day tomorrow, she told him. Otto breathed. The little river moved against his side. Above them the panels had gone to their deep evening amber, and a scatter of false stars that the conquered had put in the dome for the comfort of homesick species, and Dell looked up at stars that were not the stars over her river and felt, for the first time since the crate, the size of the distance she'd come. She hadn't had to come. That was the thing she'd never quite explained to anyone, because it sounded either mad or sentimental, and it was neither. When the family land had been bought out from under her, the river rezoned, the old permits voided, the small sad machinery of a world with no more room for a woman and a 70-year-old crocodile living quietly on a bend of brown water, she'd had options. The sanctuary on the mainland would have taken him. He'd have had a pond and a keeper and a decent end. That was the sensible choice, and she'd stood in the sanctuary office with the forms in front of her, and she had not been able to make her hand sign them, because Otto had spent 70 years choosing her family every single day, and it seemed to her that the least a person could do, faced with 70 years of that, was choose back. So when the Concord's fauna liaison had put out the call, Deathworld companion animals, licensing pathway, member world resettlement, apply within, she'd applied. And she'd told them the truth on every line. And she'd packed a cardboard box. And she'd brought her grandmother's crocodile 400 light years to argue with the most frightened, careful people in the galaxy about whether love counted as a category of fact. They think you're a weapon, she told him. I keep telling them you're not, and they keep not hearing it, because to them a thing that can kill and chooses not to is just a weapon on a safety catch. She put her hand flat on the great warm slate of his flank and felt the slow engine of him under it. But you and me know it's the other way round. Anybody can be gentle when they're weak. Grandma used to say that. Anybody can be gentle when they can't do any harm. That's not gentle, that's just small. You, her hand moved on the ancient hide, you're the only kind of gentle that's worth anything. You're the kind that could and doesn't. 70 years of could and doesn't. She leaned her head back against him. Tomorrow we're going to show them the doesn't, and they're going to be so scared, right up until the second they're not. She reached over and drew the box a little closer, into the reach of the amber light and the one gold eye that had opened when she touched it. You want to see it now? She asked him. Take the edge off. No, we'll save it for the room. She patted the cardboard. Big finish. The gold eye watched the box for a while. Then it closed, and the small woman and the enormous animal slept on the bank of a false river under false stars, in the most beautiful cage in the galaxy, and 3 levels down a sable drog lay awake in the dark with its blunt head toward the ceiling, toward the sun side, toward the elder and maid, twice in the night, so low that only its keeper felt it in the floor, the sound its kind kept for the passing of the old. Kesh Ulro came to the glass in the gray hour before the session, because he had not been able to stay away. He should have been in the medical wing. The corps physician had signed him off duty, cited the bruising and the shock, and the thing the physician had called, in the careful virile way, an event of the disposition. He should have been sedated and asleep. Instead, he stood alone at the observation rail in the dark before the panels warmed, filter askew where he had not bothered to fix it, and looked down at the animal that had chosen not to end him. Ulro was young. He had told himself, all his short career, that he understood the doctrine in his body and not only in his head, that he had earned the gray by losing someone to a licensed thing on a border world and choosing, afterward, to spend his life keeping the terrible on the far side of the glass rather than hating it. He had believed that made him clear-eyed where the older wardens had gone soft. He had gone down onto that floor believing he was the only one in the whole cowardly, careful directorate willing to do what the doctrine required. He had gone down there to prove the animal was a monster, and the animal had proven instead that Kesh Ulro was a fool. It had done it without a mark. That was the part he could not get out from under. If it had hurt him, he could have hated it, and the hating would have healed him. It had refused him even that. It had looked at him. He had seen the gold eye roll toward him. In the half-second he'd been on his back with no breath in him. It had looked at him the way you look at a thing beneath consideration, and it had turned away and gone back to sleep, and left him his life like a coin dropped for a beggar it would not trouble to look at twice. "You're not supposed to be up," said a voice behind him, the human. She'd come up the corridor in her sock feet again, silent, a mug of something steaming in her hands. "Physician's going to have your hide." I could not sleep. Ulro did not turn from the glass. His voice came out flat and strange to his own ears. "Handler, I came onto the floor to hurt your animal." "I know. I would have burned it if I had reached it. I would have set the lance to its hide and lit it and filmed what it did." He made himself say it. It seemed important in the gray hour to say the whole of it. I believed I was the only one with the courage to do what needed doing. I believed the rest of the directorate had gone soft and that the record would thank me. I believed. His voice caught, and he despised the catch and went on. "I have believed a great many things about myself that turned out to be untrue, and I learned all of them in the half-second. It took your animal to cross 4 meters, and decide I was not worth the trouble. The human came and stood at the rail beside him, small and quiet, and set the steaming mug on the rail between them, and looked down at the sleeping crocodile with him. "He didn't decide you weren't worth the trouble," she said. "That's the part you've got wrong, and it's eating you, so I'll fix it." She wrapped both hands around her own mug. "He decided you weren't a threat to me. That's all he was ever weighing. Not whether you deserve to be spared. He doesn't do deserve. He's a crocodile. Deserve isn't in him. He weighed whether the man with the lance could reach me before he could reach the man. And he could reach you first, easy, so the man didn't matter anymore. So he took the dangerous thing away, the lance, and put himself between you and his water and went back to sleep. You weren't spared for mercy, Warden. You were spared because you'd already lost, and he doesn't waste effort on things that have already lost. That's not contempt." "Well," she tilted her head, "it's a little contempt, but it's not personal. You'd have to matter for it to be personal." Ulro stared at her. "You are trying to comfort me." "I'm trying to get you to stop hating yourself over the wrong thing, which is a kind of comfort, I suppose." She sipped. "Hate yourself over the right thing. You went down there in the dark to burn a sleeping animal to prove a point to a committee. That's worth some hating. Do that for a while, get it done, and then be better. But don't hate yourself because a crocodile found you beneath his notice. Everybody's beneath his notice." "I'm beneath his notice, Warden, and I've fed him with my own hands for 11 years. He doesn't notice me. He chooses me. Those are different, and the difference is the whole thing. And if you sit with it long enough, you might be the first one of your people to actually understand what you're all so afraid of." Ulro looked down at the animal for a long time. The panels were beginning far off to warm toward the false dawn, and the first thin gold was coming up through the dome, and the crocodile lay in it, breathing, ancient, at rest, a small dark box on the bank beside it just within reach of one closed eye. "What is in the box?" Ulro said quietly. The human smiled, the small, dry, private smile he had seen her wear at the glass on the first day. "Come to the session," she said, "and find out with everybody else." And she picked up her mug and padded away up the corridor in her sock feet, and Kesh Ulro stood alone at the rail until the sun came all the way up, and did not go back to the medical wing, and began, in the slow, painful way of the young when the world first proves larger than their certainty, to think. The Muri came for the animal 2 hours before the session, and the Muri did not ask. They were scholars, the Muri soft cephalopod scholars of the deep-water worlds, brilliant and bloodless and entirely without the Vrl's doctrine of fear, which made them, in their way, more dangerous to Otto than Osk and his containment corps combined. Osk wanted the animal dead because he feared it. The Muri wanted the animal open because they were curious. And curiosity, Del had learned, is the one hunger that never feels like cruelty from the inside. Their lead scholar arrived at the glass house in a walker of pearl and water, 3 of them folded inside it, and put to Del, through a translator of exquisite courtesy, a proposal. The Muri wished to conduct, before the session, a brief series of stimulus response measurements. Non-invasive, the translator assured her, merely to establish the neurological substrate of the bonding behavior the panel had observed. They would introduce a graduated series of provocations and record the animal's responses. This would produce, the scholar felt certain, a datum of the first importance, perhaps the resolving datum, the one that would move the entire determination onto rational ground. "You want to poke him," Del said, "and film it." The translator conveyed something that took a while. The scholar says, "Yes, with instruments of great subtlety. The scholar wishes you to understand that this is offered as an alliance. If the Muri can characterize the bond as a measurable neurological phenomenon, the panel cannot dismiss it as sentiment. The scholar believes this may save the animal's life. The scholar is, it wishes you to know, on your side." Del looked at the pearl walker and at the soft, folded scholars inside it, and she believed them. That was the thing. They were on her side, and they would open Otto up with instruments of great subtlety to prove it, and they would feel, the entire time like his rescuers. "No," she said. The translator hesitated. The scholar asks you to reconsider, without a measurable substrate, the panel. He's not a datum, he's a person. Not a person like you or me, a crocodile person which is its own thing, older and simpler and better at being what it is than either of us will ever be at being what we are. And you don't run graduated provocations on a person to prove they're worth keeping alive. Dell stepped between the walker and the water, small and plain and immovable. "I know you mean it kindly. That's what makes it worse. Take your instruments back to your ship." The lead scholar did not take its instruments back to its ship. The Muri were brilliant and bloodless, and they were not, in the end, used to being refused by small mammals in worn coveralls, and the pearl walker extended, with a scholar's gentle insistence, one delicate probe arm past Dell toward the sleeping animal, merely to take a surface reading, merely to establish a baseline, merely a beginning. The probe arm never reached the water. Otto did not lunge. Dell would spend a long time afterward making the Muri understand that he had not lunged, because their instruments had been recording, and their instruments insisted otherwise, insisted on a displacement and a velocity that read as attack. He had not attacked. He had simply been asleep with the probe arm reaching toward him, and then he had been awake, and the probe arm was between his jaws, held, not crushed, held. The great mouth closed around it with a pressure that Dell could see from where she stood was almost nothing, was the pressure you'd use to carry an egg. And the gold eyes were open and level and fixed, not on the probe, but past it, on the three soft scholars folded inside their walker of pearl and water, who had never in their long, bloodless, scholarly lives had the full attention of an animal that could open the walker like a tin, and had elected, for the moment, at the invitation of its own restraint, not to. Nobody moved. The glasshouse held its breath. The false sun poured down. Then Otto opened his jaws and let the probe arm go, entirely unharmed, not a scratch on its delicate housing, and set his chin back down on the mud, and closed his eyes, and the whole event had taken. The Muri instruments agreed, 1 1/10 seconds, of which the animal had spent 1 full second asleep. The pearl walker withdrew its arm very carefully. The three scholars conferred in a rush of water sound the translator did not attempt to render. "The scholar," the translator said at last faintly, "wishes to amend its request. The scholar no longer wishes to conduct measurements." A pause. "The scholar wishes to know if it may attend the session, as an observer, at a respectful distance." The scholar says, another pause, and something almost like awe leaking through the courtesy. The scholar says it has just been permitted to keep its instrument, and it understands that it was permitted, and it would like very much to understand the mind that permits. "He'll be at the session," Dell said. "So will I sit in the back and behave, and you're welcome." She crouched by the water, by the sleeping animal, and put her hand on the warm slate of his shoulder and did not look up. "And scholar, next time a small mammal in bad clothes tells you no, hear it the first time. He did. He heard your no the whole time you were reaching. That's why you've still got your arm and your instrument both. He gave you the same courtesy you didn't give him, and he did it in 1 second, half asleep, out of an old animal's patience. Write that down if you want a datum. Write down that the deathworld's oldest killer has better manners than the Concord's finest scholars." She stood. "Sessions at noon. Don't be late." By mid-morning the story had gone, everywhere a story could go. Dell did not follow it. She had no feed access to speak of, and less interest, but Io told her, and she could see it anyway in the way the station moved. 7 governments had been watching the determination out of caution, the way you watch a quarantine, to be sure the frightening thing stayed contained. Now they were watching out of something else. The clip of the sable drog lying down had gone to every world of the Concord and beyond it. The clip of the sheared lance and the spared warden had gone with it. And now the clip of the Muri probe, held like an egg and returned without a scratch, and the human's flat little speech about manners, had gone everywhere too, and somewhere in the accumulation the frame of the whole thing had quietly turned over. It was Io who put words to it, sitting with Dell on the bank in the last hour before noon, watching the crowds gather behind the tiers of glass. "Do you know what they are saying?" he said, "on the outer feeds. The ones the Directorate does not control." "Tell me." "They are saying Earth was asked for a companion animal, and Earth sent this." Io's 4 eyes were on the crowd, on the gathering delegations, on the pearl walkers of the Muri and the tall gray columns of the Viral, and the low armored forms of a dozen species who had never in their histories agreed on anything. For 3 days the Conquered has told itself a story about a dangerous import and a naive handler. And in 3 days the whole story has turned inside out, and now the outer worlds are asking a different question, and the question is frightening them far more than the animal ever did. He turned to her. "They are asking, if this is what Earth calls a pet, if this is the animal a human keeps for love and feeds by hand, and travels 400 light-years to spare from a quiet ending, then what, in the name of all the settled worlds, does Earth keep for war?" Dell was quiet a while. Down on the bank the crocodile slept, and the box sat beside him in the noon-warming light, and the tiers of glass filled with the frightened and the curious and the newly, dangerously thoughtful. "That's the wrong question," she said finally, "but I've given up correcting people's questions this week." She stood and brushed the resin off her knees and looked up at the gathering galaxy. "Earth doesn't keep him for war. Earth doesn't keep him for anything. That's the part they'll never get, because their whole civilization is built on keeping things for reasons. My grandmother pulled a hatchling out of a cull because she couldn't stand to watch one more thing die for being born inconvenient, and she raised him because once you've saved a thing you're responsible for it, and I brought him here because he spent 70 years choosing us and it was our turn to choose back. There's no war in it anywhere. There's no reason in it at all." She picked up the box and tucked it under her arm, small and plain, and about to walk out under the noon light in front of 7 governments with the galaxy's most feared animal and a battered cardboard box. "There's just an old man who likes his float and the people who love him. That's the whole thing. That's what I'm about to show them. Let's go find out if a single one of them can see it." At noon the light came down through the great dome in a single clean flood, and Overseer Sethic Vaughn stood at the rail of the high gallery and looked out over the fullest house Ancio Reach had ever held, and understood that whatever happened in the next hour would outlive him. They had come in their hundreds. The tiers of glass that ringed the glass house were packed with delegations, the tall gray columns of his own people, ranked and filtered and afraid, the pearl walkers of the Muri, drawn up in a careful arc, their scholars folded and watching with every optic they possessed, the low armored forms of the Kesh, whose own frozen pack hunters slept in the station's holds and who had come to see the animal that made their nightmares look provisional, robed officials of a dozen worlds. A delegation of the Threll home fleet that had diverted, Io said, 3 days out of its patrol simply to be present, and whose commander had asked, on arrival, one question and only one: was it true a drog had lain down, and on being told yes had gone very quiet and requested a place at the front. Below them all, on the floor of the garden under the clean noon flood, lay the animal. It had not moved for the gathering. That was the thing Vaughn could not stop noticing. Hundreds of the galaxy's peoples had assembled in tiers to watch it, and the crowd's arrival had rolled across the glass house in a slow wave of motion and sound, and the animal had received all of it the way it received everything, with its chin on the mud and its eyes closed and the small dark box on the bank beside it, catching the light. Vaughn had watched crowds his whole career. He had watched what crowds did to animals: the panic, the pacing, the flattened ears and the bared teeth, the 1,000 small tells of a creature that knows it is surrounded. The crocodile gave none of them. The crocodile lay in the center of the largest gathering of armed and frightened strangers in the history of the station and slept, because, and Vaughn made himself think the thought all the way through, now, at noon, with the whole galaxy watching, because in the entire assembly there was not one thing worth waking for. Except her. She came out onto the floor alone, small, plain, in her gray coveralls, in her sock feet, which someone in the crowd would surely notice and not understand. She had left her boots at the door, and Vaughn thought he understood it now at the end. She walked the floor the way you walk a room where someone is sleeping. She carried nothing but the box, tucked under one arm, cardboard and packing tape and a coffee ring, the least significant object in a hall full of the galaxy's finest instruments. She set it down on the bank, near the water, near the animal. And she straightened, and she looked up at the high gallery, at Vaughn, at the ranked delegations, at the 7 governments, and she waited for the hall to go quiet, which it did, in a long, slow settling, until the only sound in the glass house was the little river and the vast, soft breathing of the thing on its bank. "You wanted a demonstration of control," Dell said. Her voice was not loud. The hall's systems caught it and carried it, and in the silence it did not need to be loud. "You wanted me to muzzle him or chain him or drug him and prove to you that I can make him not be what he is. I'm not going to do that. Not because I can't, because it would be a lie, and you'd know it was a lie, and you'd retire him anyway, and you'd be right to, because a chain thing tells you nothing about what it would do free." She stood over the sleeping animal, small against its length. "So I'm going to show you the truth instead. It's going to frighten you. I want to say that first so you don't feel foolish afterward for being frightened. You're supposed to be frightened. It'd be stupid not to be. What I'm going to ask you to notice is what he does with your fear once it's in the room." She crouched and put her hand on the box. "Some of you have seen our records," she said. "You know what his kind do to an arm. It's the first thing your directorate said to me, that on my world he's the reason certain rivers have no swimmers. That's true. Everything they told you about him is true. Hold on to that. Don't let it go while you watch this, because if you let it go, the demonstration doesn't mean anything. He is exactly as dangerous as you have been told. Now watch what that danger does when it loves something." And she opened the box. Eosarn had brought Ord up to the floor. The directorate had not ordered it this time. Eo had requested it, and Vaughn, to the surprise of the whole corps, had granted it. So the keeper stood at the edge of the garden with 2.5 tons of sable drog beside him, the tether loose in his lower hand, and he felt the great body go still and attentive as the human opened the box, and he understood that his beast, alone in all that hall of the frightened, was not frightened at all. Ord had made its peace with the elder on the first day. Ord had come today, the way you come to watch a master at work, to learn. Eo watched the human lift the wool out of the box, a square of gray, old, worn, soft. And then, from inside the wool, the thing the manifest had called an object of no determinable purpose. A rough sphere the size of a fruit, cork and canvas, bleached to bone, mended and mended and mended until the mending was most of it. She held it up in the noon light and turned it once, so the crowd could see there was nothing to it. No mechanism, no edge, no weapon, only an old ball, repaired by more than one hand across more than one lifetime. And the crocodile opened its eyes. Eo felt Ord shift beside him, not toward the human, not toward the elder, but a small settling, a lowering, the posture the drog took when it was witnessing something it judged important. Down on the bank the great slate head came up off the mud, the first time it had lifted for anything but a threat, and the 2 gold lamps of its eyes found the sphere in the human's hand, and something went through the whole enormous length of the animal that Eo had no name for and would never forget. It was not hunger. Eo knew hunger. It was not aggression. He knew that too in all its grammars. It was recognition, but not the cold apex-to-apex recognition the drog had shown, not the reading of a rival. It was the recognition a creature has for the one fixed point in a life of moving water. The animal looked at the old cork ball the way Eo had once, long ago, on a shore of his heavy homeworld, looked up and found the one star his people steer by. The crocodile came out of the water. The hall made a sound, a vast indrawn breath, hundreds of throats and siphons and vents, the sound of the galaxy bracing. Because it was moving now, the thing they had all been told about. 6 meters of ambush predator rising off the bank and coming up out of the river toward the small, soft human who stood between it and nothing at all. And every instinct in every watching species screamed the same word in the same voice. And the human did not move. Del held the float in her open hand and watched Otto come, and she was not afraid, and she made no effort to look unafraid, because the two are different and the animals of the universe can always tell. He came the way he'd come to her 10,000 times, up out of the water with the mud sheeting off him, the great head swinging, the gold eyes fixed on the float. He came unhurried. He always came unhurried for the float. It was the one thing in his long life he had never once had to hurry for, because it had never once been taken from him, because in 70 years no one had ever been fool enough or cruel enough to make him hurry for the one thing that was his. Behind her, Del could hear the hall, the braced silence of it, the certainty rolling off the tears like heat. Here it comes. Here is the arm. Here is the moment the naive human learns what the directorate has known all along. "Hey, old man," Del said, soft just for him. "Look what I found." She knelt down in front of 600 kilos of the deathworld's oldest killer, on the bank of a false river under a false sun with the galaxy watching, and she held the float out on her flat open palm, her whole bare arm extended toward the jaws, and she waited for him to decide, the way she had waited her whole life, the way her grandmother had waited before her. Otto opened his mouth. She heard the hall break, heard the scream go up from 100 delegations at once, heard something in the gallery that might have been Vaughn's voice and might have been Osk's, heard the wet vast sound of those jaws parting to their full and appalling width, the pale cave of the mouth, the double row of teeth, the throat, close enough to feel the warm swamp breath of him on her arm. She kept her arm still. She kept her palm flat. She kept the float steady on it, an old cork ball in the mouth of a thing that could take her to the elbow before the scream finished leaving the crowd. And the jaws closed. They closed over the float and over her hand and half her forearm both, the mouth shutting around all of it, the teeth coming down, and the hall's scream cut off into a silence so total that Del could hear, inside the dark warm cave of him, the small dry sound of the cork settling against his tongue. He held it. He held her hand and the float together in a mouth that could have sheared a shock lance, and the pressure on her skin was nothing, was less than a handshake, was the exact and unfathomable gentleness of an animal carrying the one thing in the universe it had decided, 70 years ago, to be careful with. And she was inside that decision, her arm in the dark of him, held like the float, held like something precious, because to Otto, in the only language he had, they were the same thing. The float was hers. She was his. He was careful with what was his. Del turned her head, her arm still in his mouth, to the forearm, and looked up at the frozen hall, at the 7 governments, at the tall, pale, terrified administrator gripping the rail of the high gallery. And she said, into the ringing silence, in her flat, quiet voice that did not rise and never had, "This is the part I wanted you to see." Then Otto opened his mouth. He opened it slowly, and her arm came out of it whole, wet to the elbow, gleaming, unmarked, not a scratch, not a scrape, the skin unbroken, and in his jaws, held delicately now on the flat of his tongue, was the float, and the float only, taken from her palm with a precision no instrument in that hall could have matched. And he lifted his great head and turned, unhurried, and carried the old cork ball back down the bank, and into the shallows to the flat sunny stone that had been his spot for 3 days. And he set it down, and he curled the whole slate length of himself around it, the way he had curled around it every night for 70 years in the mud of a river 400 light-years away, and he put his chin down next to it, and he closed his eyes. And Del Marrow knelt on the bank with her wet, unmarked arm and her empty hands, and she did not look at the animal. She looked at the hall. She let them look at the animal. She let 7 governments look at the deathworld's oldest killer curled around a battered cork ball in a patch of borrowed sun, gentle as water, asleep home. "He's had that since he was smaller than my hand," she said into the silence. My grandmother gave it to him. She's been dead 11 years and he still sleeps with the thing she gave him because she was kind to him once when the world wasn't and he never forgot it. 70 years. You want to talk about what he is?" Her voice did not rise. It got quieter, if anything, and the hall leaned to catch it. "That's what he is. He's a thing that never forgets a kindness. That's the whole animal. That's the whole terrible weapon you spent 3 days deciding how to kill. He remembers who was gentle with him, and he is gentle back for 70 years past the grave, and there is not enough power in this station or your whole Concord to make him hurt the hand that holds his home." She stood. "You were right about everything except the one thing that matters. He could. He's the most he could animal in the galaxy. And he doesn't. Every day of his life he doesn't. Now." She looked up at the gallery at Vaughn, determined that. The hall did not applaud. It was not that kind of hall, and it had not been that kind of moment. What the hall did was worse, from the directorate's point of view, and better from everyone else's. It fell into the particular silence of a great many people revising, all at once, a thing they had been certain of that morning. Vaughn stood at the rail with his gloved hands locked on the metal, and could not, for a long moment, make himself move or speak. He had watched the arm go into the mouth. He had, to his enduring shame, been the voice in the gallery that cried out. He had heard himself do it, the sound torn out of him before the doctrine or the dignity could stop it, the raw, involuntary no of a person watching a young creature destroy herself. And then the arm had come out whole, and the animal had carried its ancient ball back to its stone and curled around it and slept. And Vaughn had understood, standing at the rail with the cry still ringing in his own throat, that he had just been shown, in front of the entire watching galaxy, the exact and precise location of the line between the tame and the terrible, and that it did not run where he had spent 40 years insisting it ran. It did not run between the animal and the person. It ran through the middle of the animal, and the animal chose, every day, which side to stand on. "Overseer," Osk was at his shoulder, and Osk's voice was low and hard and shaking with something that was not quite fear and not quite fury. "Overseer, you cannot let this stand. I know what you saw. We all saw it. It was, I will not pretend it was not remarkable, but remarkable is not safe. Do you understand the precedent? If we license this animal on the strength of a performance, a trust exercise, then every deathworld handler from here to the rim will bring us their monster and their sad story and their childhood toy, and we will have no ground left to stand on when we say no. The doctrine is not cruelty, Sethic. The doctrine is the promise. The promise that the terrible stays out. You are about to break the promise because a human made you cry out at a rail, and I am telling you, as your warden superior, that the feeling in your throat right now is the most dangerous thing in this hall, more dangerous than the animal, because the animal cannot get inside the directorate and the feeling already has." Vaughn looked at him. Osk was not wrong. That was the terrible part, the part Vaughn would sit with for the rest of his career. Osk was not wrong. The promise was real. The fear was earned. The Sethin number was still the Sethin number, the creche decks and the long night, and no amount of remarkable would give those children back. And a directorate that licensed monsters on the strength of their gentleness would, sooner or later, license the wrong one, and the number would grow. "Say it is true," Vaughn said slowly. "Say we are right to fear. We are, Osk. I have not stopped fearing for one moment of these 3 days, and I do not intend to start. Say the doctrine is a real promise and the promise matters." He turned back to the glass, to the sleeping animal, to the small human standing on the bank with her wet arm, waiting, not looking at the gallery now, letting them work. "Then answer me one question, and answer it as the man who wants it dead, because I want your best answer and not your kind one." He faced Osk fully. "How do we keep the promise? You have heard Threnu's models. We cannot retire it awake. The Corps will not sign, and they are right not to. We cannot retire it asleep without doing it on this feed, treacherously, and teaching every world of the conquered that the directorate murders sleeping creatures that have harmed no one. And we cannot license it, you say, without breaking the doctrine. So tell me, Warden Superior, you have closed every door. Which one do we walk through? Because I have stood at this rail for 40 years and I have always had a door. And this animal has taken every door I own, and it has done it without lifting its head, and it is asleep down there right now with a child's ball, and I do not have a door, and I need my hardest man to find me one or tell me there isn't any. Osk was silent for a long time. There isn't any, he said at last, quietly. The fury gone out of him and only the fear left, and under the fear something that was almost grief, the grief of a man watching a wall he loved come down and knowing it had to. There isn't any door, Sethek. I have been looking for 3 days. That is why I have been so, he gestured, a small broken motion. The animal did not leave us a way to be right the old way. It closed them all, not with teeth, with restraint. Every act of restraint it showed us closed another door, because you cannot in conscience destroy a thing for being dangerous after it has spent 3 days declining in front of everyone to be dangerous. He looked down at the floor at the sleeping shape. I wanted it dead because I was afraid. I am still afraid, but I have run out of honest reasons, and I will not give this panel a dishonest one. I withdraw the motion for retirement. His jaw worked. I do not know what to put in its place. That is your office, overseer, not mine. I only break the wall. You are the one who has to decide what to build where it stood. It was the Threll commander who spoke next, and the hall turned to her, because the Threll home fleet did not divert for trifles, and its commander had not said a word all session. She was old for a Threll, gray to the muzzle, four-armed and heavy-shouldered, and she wore the plain dark of a fighting fleet with no ornament but rank. She rose in the front tier and inclined her head first to the panel, and then the hall noted it. The hall would talk about it for years. She inclined her head more deeply to the keeper Eo Sarn and the sable Drog standing quiet at the edge of the floor. I came 3 days out of my patrol, she said, to see whether it was true that a Drog had lain down. It was told to me and I did not believe it. I have fought beside Drogs. I have seen what it takes to make one yield, and it is death, and usually not the Drogs, so I came to see the lie for myself. She looked down at Ord, at the great iron shape of it lying attentive beside its keeper, watching the sleeping crocodile with the patience of a student. It is not a lie, and I have watched the rest of it now, the lance and the scholar's instrument and the arm. And I find I must say a thing to this panel that my fleet did not send me to say, and that I will answer for to my own government, because it is true and someone in this hall should say it plainly before you vote. She set her lower hands on the rail. You keep asking what it is. You have asked for 3 days. Is it a weapon? Is it a companion? Is it a danger? Is it a datum? You are asking the wrong people. You are asking your instruments and your doctrines and your models. You should be asking the animals. She gestured, one broad hand to Ord. My Drogs would tell you if you could hear them. That one told you already it lay down. The scholars know it gave back with a whole instrument told you. And your own warden, she found Ulro in the gallery, and the young Verl straightened under the look. Your own warden went to burn it in the dark, and it left him his life and his whole skin. And if you had the wit of the beast you keep, you would have read the verdict in that and saved yourselves 3 days. The animals of 6 species have looked at this creature, and every one of them has returned the same finding, and it is not the finding your doctrine expected, and you have spent 3 days refusing to accept a verdict that every predator in this hall reached in the first 10 seconds. She straightened. It is old, it is dangerous, and it is safe, not safe the way a tame thing is safe, safe the way a good sword in a wise hand is safe, which is to say deadly to exactly what it chooses and to nothing else. My fleet would not fear it. My fleet would be honored to make way for it, the way my Drog made way. That is the finding of the animals panel. I would weigh it above your instruments. The instruments have been wrong for 3 days. The animals have been right since the first 10 seconds. She sat, the hall was very quiet. And Vaughn at the rail thought, she is right, and it is worse than she knows because it is not only the finding of the animals. He looked down at the human, small on the bank, and he thought about the manifest, and the box for the specimen's relationship to the handler, and the word that did not translate. Pet. He had spent 3 days treating it as a category error, a human sentimentality mislabeling a weapon, and it was not a category error. It was a category his people did not have, because his people had spent their whole terrified history sorting the living universe into the tame and the terrible, and had never once considered that a thing could be entirely terrible and entirely gentle in the same body, at the same time, by choice, for 70 years. That the two were not opposites to be sorted but a single fact to be trusted, and that the trusting was the whole of what the human meant by the untranslatable word. He turned from the rail. "Clear the hall," he said. "The panel will deliberate. The handler and her animal will remain in the glasshouse under keeper courtesy, not containment. Keeper Sarn." Io looked up. "Your drog conducted itself with more wisdom than my directorate. Thank you for bringing it. It made the case better than any of us." And then, because he was a precise man and precision was the last thing he had left, he added, "For the record, for the feed, for the 7 governments. Let it be noted that the overseer of the Directorate of Clean Worlds cried out in fear when the handler extended her arm. Let it be noted that he was wrong to fear for her and right to fear the animal, and that both of those were true at once, and that the reconciling of them is the substance of this determination. Strike nothing. I want the whole of it in the record, including my error, especially my error. We adjourn." They deliberated for 6 hours, and Dell spent all 6 of them on the bank with Otto, because there was nowhere else she wanted to be, and no one had the standing anymore to tell her to be elsewhere. Io stayed with her a while, and oared with him, the great drog settling at a respectful distance up the bank, watching the crocodile with its patient student's eyes, and the 2 keepers sat between their 2 impossible animals and did not say very much, because there was not very much that needed saying. At one point Ord rose and moved a few meters closer to the water, and Io tensed, and then did not, because the drog only lowered itself again, nearer the elder, and put its blunt head down, and Otto opened one gold eye and regarded the young apex for a moment and then closed it, and that was all, and it was also everything. The oldest killer in the galaxy and the station's own nightmare, sharing a riverbank in the noon light, one of them teaching and one of them learning, and neither of them at any point afraid. Kesh Ulro came down onto the floor in the 3rd hour. He came alone, without the lance, without the core, his plating still bruised, his filter fixed now, walking the way the human walked, slow and careful, the way you walk where something is sleeping. He stopped a good distance off and stood there, and Dell watched him work up to it, and did not help him, because some things a person has to cross on their own. "I wish to ask," Ulro said finally, "whether I might sit on the bank, at a distance you judge safe. I am not asking to approach it. I am asking to be near it and to understand before the panel votes what I nearly destroyed. I think I owe it that. To sit near the thing I came to burn and be for a while not a threat to it. I do not know if that means anything to an animal. It means something to me." "Sit down, Warden," Dell said. "He knows the difference between a man with a lance and a man without one. You'd be surprised how much they know." She patted the resin beside her, a careful 2 meters from the water. "Not too close. Not for his sake. For yours you'll shake. The first time you sit this near, everybody does, and he'll feel you shaking and it won't bother him but it'll bother you. Sit and breathe long and let him get used to you being a person instead of a problem. That's all it ever is. That's the whole secret my grandmother spent her life on. You just be a person, near them, trustworthy, every day and let them decide." Kesh Ulro sat down on the bank of the false river, 2 meters from the deathworld's oldest killer, and he shook exactly as she'd said he would, and the crocodile did not stir, and after a while the shaking stopped, and the young Vril who had gone into the dark to burn a sleeping animal sat in the noon light beside it and was, for the first time in his frightened, careful life, near something terrible and not afraid, and Dell watched his face change and thought, "There. That's one. If I can turn the one who wanted him dead, I can turn the rest. It only ever takes the one." The panel returned at the 6th hour, and Vaughn did not deliver the finding from the gallery. He came down. No one had told him to. There was no protocol for it. There was, in fact, a protocol against it, an old unwritten world doctrine older than the directorate, that no member of the Corps set foot on the floor of a live specimen enclosure, because the floor was the far side of the glass, and the far side of the glass was where the terrible lived. Vaughn had kept that doctrine for 40 years. He had never once stood on the ground with a deathworld animal. He had built a career, a reputation, a whole architecture of fear on never having to. He came down the long ramp into the glass house alone, in the amber of the failing afternoon light, and the hundreds in the tiers watched him do it and made no sound, and he walked out onto the resin floor toward the small human and the sleeping animal and the young warden sitting shaken on the bank, and he stopped a careful distance from the water, and he stood there, the overseer of the Directorate of Clean Worlds, on the wrong side of his own glass, for the first time in his life. "Handler Marrow," he said. "Overseer. The panel has reached its determination." He had the finding. He did not read it from the slate. He had written it himself in the 6th hour over Threnu's careful phrasing and Osk's silence, and he found he wanted to say it as himself, on the floor to her face, before he said it to the record. "We cannot license your animal." Dell's expression did not change. Behind her on his stone, Otto breathed. Up the bank, Ulra went very still. "The schedule of permitted life has no category for it," Vaughn went on. "That is the truth, and I will not dress it. Your animal is an apex predator of a deathworld, and the schedule forbids the licensing of apex predators of deathworlds, and it forbids it for a reason that is real and that I will defend to my death, because 200 years ago a careless authority licensed such a thing, and it reached the young, and my people have counted the number every day since. That number is why the Directorate exists. I will not pretend it away because you moved me. You did move me." I cried out at the rail. The whole galaxy watched me do it. I have ordered it kept in the record. But a man who governs by the thing that made him cry out is not fit to govern, and I will not license a deathworld's apex against the schedule because a woman was brave and an animal was gentle. The answer, under the schedule as it is written, is no. He paused. The amber light hummed. And then Overseer Sethic Vaughn did the second thing no Vril of the Corps had done in living memory. He reached up, and he unfastened the seal at his wrist, and he drew off the outer glove, and then the inner glove, and he stood on the floor of the glass house with one bare hand, pale, plated, the naked hand of a Vril, which the galaxy almost never saw, which his own doctrine held that a warden did not expose to the living world of the deathworlds. And he looked at it as if it belonged to someone else, and then he looked at her. "So I am going to amend the schedule," he said. The hall did not breathe. "Not for your animal. Do not mistake me. I am not bending a rule to save one creature I have grown fond of over 3 days. I am a worse administrator than that, and a better one. I am amending it because the schedule is wrong, and your animal proved it wrong, and a promise built on a wrong thing is not a promise. It is only a habit dressed as one. The schedule sorts the living universe into the tame and the terrible. It has one column for the things that may be let in and one column for the things that must be kept out, and it has spent 200 years believing those columns are the whole of the world." He turned the bare hand over, palm up, in the amber light. "Your animal does not fit either column, because your animal is both at once by choice and has been for 70 years. It is terrible. It is gentle, not gentle because it was made harmless, gentle because it decides, every day, with the full and undiminished power to decide otherwise, to be gentle to what it loves and terrible only to what threatens it. That is not a thing my schedule has a column for. So my schedule was incomplete, and an incomplete schedule that calls itself a promise is a lie, and I have kept enough of my career clean that I will not end it by defending a lie." He looked up at the gallery, at Threnu, at Osk standing silent and pale, at the 7 governments in their tiers. "There will be a third column." His voice took the flat certainty Dell had heard him use on the first day, the voice of a man setting a coin down on a counter, except now the coin was his whole life's work. Let it be recorded. The schedule of permitted life is amended by the addition of a third disposition, between the permitted and the forbidden. The disposition is this: a deathworld animal that has demonstrated before witnesses sustained restraint under its own control toward a bonded keeper across the whole of its life, not the absence of danger, but the presence of chosen restraint, verified by the finding of the animals as much as the finding of the instruments, may be admitted under keeper covenant, the keeper standing surety, the covenant standing for the life of the animal. He drew a breath. The core modeled that we could not retire this animal without treachery, and could not license it without breaking the doctrine. This is the door, Warden Superior asked. This is the door you told me did not exist. It does not lead where our old doors led, but it holds the promise: the terrible stays out unless the terrible has shown us over a lifetime on which side of itself it chooses to stand. And this one has shown us, for 70 years, around a child's ball, in front of us all. He looked back down at Dell, and at the sleeping animal, and he did a thing then that Dell would carry for the rest of her own life. He crouched, the tall, pale administrator, on the floor of the glass house, folding himself down to the level of the small human and the water, and he extended the bare hand slowly, not to the animal. He was not a fool and never had been, but to the old cork float lying against the crocodile's flank, the sun-bleached mended ball that was the whole terrible weapon's whole terrible secret. And he did not touch it. He only held his naked, ungloved hand a breath above it. The closest avowal of the core had come to the living world of a death world in the memory of anyone watching, and he said, very quietly, so that only she and the record and the sleeping animal could hear, "Your grandmother made a good repair on the seam here. It has held a long time." He withdrew the hand. "We do not have, my people do not keep things this long. We are afraid of what accumulates. We sterilize, we renew. We would have thrown this away 200 times over." He rose. "I think that may be the whole of what my people have gotten wrong. I think we have been so afraid of what accumulates that we never learned what a thing becomes when you let it. 70 years. He remembers who was kind." He looked at the sleeping crocodile with an expression Dell had not seen on a virile face before and would rarely see again. "We built a wall to keep the terrible out, and the terrible has been asleep on a riverbank the whole time, keeping a ball, remembering an old woman's kindness past her grave, and we were the ones who forgot how to do that. Handler Marrow." He straightened to his full pale height and refastened slowly the inner glove and then the outer, sealing his bare hand away again, but slower than he had ever sealed it, Dell thought, and with something like reluctance. "Your covenant is granted. You stand surety for him for the length of his life. Welcome to the conquered, both of you." A pause. "All three of you, I suppose, counting the ball. It appears to be load-bearing." And Del Marrow, who had not raised her voice in 3 days, who had knelt and put her arm in the mouth of the deathworld's oldest killer in front of 7 governments and not flinched, felt her eyes sting for the first time since the crate, and she looked down at the sleeping animal so the galaxy would not see it, and she said, roughly, "Hear that, old man? We're in." Otto's tail moved once in the shallows. There and gone. He'd heard her. He always heard her. The covenant did not stay a single quiet paragraph in an amended schedule. Nothing the conquered did stayed quiet. The conquered was a civilization of careful people, and careful people, once they decide a thing matters, cannot help but build around it. Within the month, the third disposition had a name. Vaughn had not given it one. He had written it plainly, Keeper Covenant, and left it plain on purpose. But the Corps could not leave it plain. The wardens who processed the covenant paperwork, the clerks who filed it, the training officers who now had to teach it to the next intake, they all needed something to call it, and what they called it in the end was the Marrow provision, after the small human in the worn coveralls. And then, when someone pointed out that the human was not the point, they called the demonstration itself the offering, because that was what it had looked like. The woman kneeling on the bank with her arm extended and the old ball on her open palm, offering the animal the one thing it loved and trusting it with the one thing it could take, and the two being, in the animal's eyes, the same thing. Del thought the name was overwrought and said so to Io on the bank. It wasn't an offering. It was me giving my crocodile his ball back. That's all it was. That is what the sacred always is, Io said comfortably from where he lay stretched in the sun with Ord dozing beside him. Afterward, at the time, it is only a person giving a crocodile his ball back. The solemn part comes later when the frightened people who watch it try to make sure they never forget what it taught them. Let them have their name. It is how they hold on to a thing they cannot otherwise keep. He tilted his broad gray head. They have written a doctrine, you know, the core, 12 pages. On the correct conduct of the offering, there is a section on the box. There is not. There is a section on the box. On the importance of the keeper bringing the animal's most valued object in a container of no significance, so that the object's value is legible only to the animal and the keeper, and not to the state. Io's whiskers moved in the Threll equivalent of a smile. They have made your grandmother's cardboard box into an instrument of covenant law. There is a diagram. I have seen it. The coffee ring is in the diagram handle or marrow. They reproduce the coffee ring. Del put her face in her hands and laughed until her ribs hurt, and up the bank Otto opened one gold eye at the sound of her laughing, and closed it again, satisfied, and slept. The Muri came back once before their walkers left the station, and their lead scholar asked, through the courteous translator, for one thing only, and it was not a measurement. The scholar wishes to apologize, the translator said, for the reaching. The scholar has reviewed the recording of its own conduct in slow time and has seen the animal decline for the full second before it acted, and has understood at last that it was warned clearly in the animal's own grammar, and chose not to hear the warning because it did not believe an animal could give one. The scholar says this was the failure, not of instruments, of respect. The scholar had decided in advance what the animal could be, and so it could not perceive what the animal was, though the animal was showing it plainly the entire time. A pause. The scholar wishes to know if it may record one datum, only one, with your permission and the animal's. What datum? Del said. The scholar drifted its walker forward, slow and careful, respectful now in a way it had not known how to be a month ago, and it stopped a good distance from the water, and it did not extend any arm. It simply folded itself lower in the pearl and the water, and it looked at the sleeping crocodile with every optic it owned, and the translator conveyed, softly. The scholar wishes to record that it was wrong. That is the datum. The scholar has never before submitted a datum whose only content is the scholar's own error, and it believes this may be the most valuable datum it has gathered in a long life of gathering. The scholar wishes to file it under the animal's name, so that the record of the conquered will show, permanently, that on this date the Muri looked at a deathworld's oldest killer and saw a weapon, and were corrected by the killer's own restraint, and that the correction was received with gratitude. The walker inclined. The scholar thanks you, and it thanks the animal, though it does not expect the animal to care, which it now understands is precisely the point. He cares that you stopped reaching, Del said. That's the only part of you he ever cared about, and you got it right in the end. That's more than most manage. Safe travels, scholar. The pearl walker withdrew, slow and reverent, and Del watched it go and thought, too. The warden and the scholars. The ones who wanted him dead and the ones who wanted him open, and both of them turned, and both of them turned by the same thing, not by him being safe, but by him being dangerous and choosing in front of them, over and over, patiently not to be. You couldn't argue anyone out of their fear. She'd stopped trying on the second day. You could only let them watch the fear be answered, again and again, by an old animal's restraint, until the answering wore a channel through the fear the way water wears a channel through stone. It took a long time. It took 70 years, really. She was only showing them the last 3 days of it. But it worked when nothing else did because it was the one thing that could not be faked, and everyone in that hall had known, watching her arm go into that mouth, that it could not be faked. Word went out from Ancio Reach the way word does, and it did not go out the way the directorate would have chosen. The directorate would have chosen for the story to be about the amended schedule, the careful new third disposition, the covenant law and its 12 solemn pages. That was the story the directorate understood and could manage. But that was not the story that went out. The story that went out was the arm, and the ball, and the small human in the worn coveralls, and the sentence the Threll commander had said in the hall, the sentence that ran within a season to every world that had a feed and lodged there and would not leave. If this is what Earth keeps for love, what does Earth keep for war? It was, as Del had said, the wrong question, and it did not matter that it was the wrong question, because the galaxy was going to ask it anyway, and the asking changed things. Del did not see most of the changing. She was on the bank with Otto, learning the covenant paperwork, teaching the Corps the difference between restraint and safety, being, mostly, a young woman with an old crocodile, 400 light-years from home, making a home. But Io brought her the news of it, dry and amused over the weeks. The Kesh had quietly withdrawn a licensing request for a batch of frozen pack hunters, and filed instead a request to send observers to Earth. Not soldiers, not scholars, observers to learn, the request said, the keeping. A mining consortium 3 systems over that had loved its horses had put in for the Covenant on a working dog, a plain shepherd bitch that had been with a survey team 11 years, and the Covenant had been granted, and the survey team had wept, Io said, all of them, at the granting. A Muri research fleet had rewritten its whole intake protocol, striking the word specimen from its forms, and replacing it with a term of its own devising that its translators rendered, after some hesitation, as the one who may decline. A border warden on a world Del had never heard of had refused an order to cull a nesting pair of imported raptors, cited the marrow provision by name, and been suspended, and then reinstated, and then quietly promoted, all inside a single season. Somewhere out past the rim, a checkpoint captain who had turned a human vessel away a year before now waved one through without a word, because the manifest listed a dog, and the captain had watched the feed like everyone else, and had decided he would rather be the sort of person who let the dog in. The gap in the wall widened world by world, and the frightened people crowded up to the edge of it to look through. A virile creche world of all the places in the Concord, the very kind of place the Sethin number had been counted at had petitioned, carefully, nervously, with 100 safeguards attached, to bring in a single Earth animal for the young to know. A dog. They wanted a dog. They had spent 200 years teaching the young the number, and now, quietly, over the objection of half their own council, they wanted the young to know one gentle, terrible thing by name, so that the number would not be the only thing the young inherited. You have broken something, Io told her not unkindly on the bank. Do you understand that? You did not mean to. You came here to save one old animal from a quiet ending, but the thing you broke was bigger than the one animal. You broke the wall between the tame and the terrible for the whole Concord, and they will be a long time deciding what to do in the gap. Some of them will get it wrong. Some handler somewhere will bring the wrong animal or be the wrong keeper, and it will end badly, and the frightened people will point at it and say, "We told you, the wall was there for a reason." And they will be right, too. That is the thing your grandmother's provision does not solve. It only trades an old danger for a new freedom, and freedom has a number as well, and someday the conquered will have to count it. He looked at her steadily with all 4 eyes. I do not say this to trouble you. I say it because you are the surety, and a surety should know the size of what she has signed. I know the size of it. Del sat with her back against Otto's warm flank, in the amber of another false afternoon, and did not look away from the old keeper. My grandmother knew it too. You don't get the could and doesn't without the could. There's no version of him that's safe and still worth anything. Same with the whole thing you're talking about, no version of a galaxy that's brave enough to keep terrible gentle things that isn't also brave enough to sometimes get hurt. They spent 200 years choosing the wall, and the wall kept them safe, and it kept them small, and it made them so afraid of what accumulates that they forgot how to love anything long enough for it to become what he's become. She put her hand flat on the ancient slate of his flank, on the slow engine of him. I'll take the number. So will they, once they've felt it. You should have seen the Creche World's petition, Iyo. 100 safeguards and every one of them shaking, and they filed it anyway, because they'd rather their kids grow up knowing one gentle, terrible thing than grow up knowing only the number. That's not me breaking something. That's them fixing something. I just gave them back their ball. They gave him a world in the end, or a piece of one. The Covenant did not require it. Del could have stayed in the glass house, and for a while they did, because the glass house was warm and clean and had a river, and because leaving felt, at first, like more than she had strength for. But the Conquered, once it had decided a thing mattered, could not stop building around it, and someone in the resettlement office had looked at the file and at the surety and at the 70-year-old animal from a bend of brown earth water, and had found 3 systems out. A warm, shallow world the Conquered kept as a preserve, a place of slow rivers and reed beds under a wide gold sun, and had offered it. A stretch of quiet bank, keeper's quarters, no fences, the Covenant standing. Del went and looked at it before she said yes. She stood on the bank of a slow alien river under a sun that was not Earth's sun but was close enough, warm on her arms, gold on the water, and she watched insects that were not Earth insects rise off reeds that were not Earth reeds, and she thought about her grandmother, hip deep in the brown water, saying, "You don't tame them, girl," and she thought, "This'll do, Grandma. This'll do him fine." They flew Otto out in the spring, in a crate that he ignored, and Del walked down the ramp beside him onto the warm bank of his new river with the cardboard box under her arm, and she opened it, and she took out the float, and she set it in the shallows, and the deathworld's oldest killer slid into a 4th river of his long life, and curled around the one thing that had been in all 4 of them, and put his chin down, and was home. Kesh Ulro came out to the preserve twice a year after that. He had left the Corps. Not in disgrace, Vaughn had seen to that, had written him a clean release, had said in the letter that a warden who could be corrected by an animal's mercy was worth more than one who could not, and that the directorate would be poorer for losing him and richer for having been served by him, both of which were true at once, which Ulro had come to understand was how most true things came. He had gone to the Keeper Corps instead, to Iyo, to learn the thing the directorate had spent his whole youth teaching him to fear. He was slow at it. He would always be slow at it. He had started late, and he carried the number in his body still, the creche decks and the long night, and he always would. But he sat on the banks now instead of standing over them with a lance, and he had learned to breathe long, and the animals had stopped reading him as a problem, and once, on his 4th visit to the preserve, Del had watched him sit 2 meters from Otto for an hour in the gold light without shaking at all, and she had thought, there. That's the whole distance a person can travel if they want it badly enough. From the man with the lance in the dark to the man on the bank in the sun. Same person. He just decided which side of himself to stand on, same as the crocodile, same as everybody in the end. Vaughn came once. He came in the 2nd year, alone, without the Corps, without the gray and silver of his office, in plain traveling clothes, which Del had not known a Verl owned, and he stood on the bank a careful distance from the water and looked at the old animal curled in the reeds around its ball, and he did not say anything for a long time. "I retired," he said finally. "The directorate, I gave it to Threnu. She is better at the new shape of it than I would be. I built the wall. I am not the one to tend the gap. That takes someone who never loved the wall the way I did." He was quiet a moment. "I find I do not know what to do with myself. 40 years of keeping the terrible on the far side of the glass, and then I stood on the floor and took off my glove, and now there is no glass, and I am—" he gestured, the small broken motion Del remembered from Osk in the hall. I am a man who spent his life afraid of what accumulates, and I am old and nothing has accumulated. I sterilized it all. I renewed it all. I kept nothing 70 years. I have no ball, handle, or marrow. I looked at your animal in that hall, and I understood that I had built a whole life, so that nothing would ever mean to me what that ruined piece of cork means to him. And I do not know how to unbuild it at my age, and I did not know where else to come and say so. Dell looked at him for a while. Then she got up off the bank and she went to the keeper's quarters, and she came back with something, and she held it out to him. A smooth gray river stone, ordinary, the size of an egg, worn to a soft shine. "That's from Earth," she said. "From my river. I brought a pocketful. Grandma used to scratch the soft spot under his jaw with one, and he liked it, and I keep a few around for when he's old and stiff and wants the scratching." She pressed it into his gloved hand. "It's not 70 years. You can't shortcut the 70 years, that's the whole point of them, but you can start. That's a start. Keep it. Carry it around. Let it get smooth in your pocket. In 40 years it'll mean something, and you'll be too old to enjoy it. And that's the joke of the whole thing. That's the joke my grandmother spent her life inside. You plant the tree you'll never sit under. You keep the ball for the animal that'll outlive you. You start the 70 years knowing you won't see the end. That's not sad, overseer. That's the only thing that isn't." She closed his gloved fingers over the stone. "You asked me on the first day why I wasn't dead. You remember?" "I remember." "You thought it was a clever question. It was a scared question." She stepped back. "I told you he'd miss me. You adjourned early, but that was the whole answer, and it's the answer to your thing too. You start the 70 years so that something someday would miss you. That's it. That's the entire secret my whole family spent 4 generations on. Keep the stone. Let something miss you. It's not too late. It's only ever too late if you decide it is, and you've just proved you can amend a thing you decided was permanent." She almost smiled. "You wrote a whole 3rd column. A stone's easy after that." Vaughn stood on the bank of an alien river with an earth stone closed in his gloved fist, and he looked at it for a long time. And then he did the last thing Dell ever saw a Vril of the Corps do that no Vril of the Corps did. He drew off the glove, both gloves, inner and outer, and he closed the stone in his bare, pale-plated hand, so that it touched his skin, so that it could begin, at once, to learn him and be learned. And he stood there in the gold light with a piece of earth against his naked palm and his eyes on the sleeping animal, and he said very quietly, "Thank you." And Dell did not know if he was saying it to her, or to the crocodile, or to the stone, or to 70 years he had not started and might yet, at the very end, begin. She thought probably all of them. She thought that was probably how most true things worked. In the 3rd year, the children came. It was the creche world's doing in the end, though it took the creche world 3 years to work up to it. They had wanted a dog, at first, a small, safe, gentle thing, a shepherd or a retriever, something the young could pet without the council losing its nerve. But somewhere in 3 years of careful argument the petition had changed, the way things changed now, all across the Concord, in the gap where the wall had been. Someone on the creche world's council had said, in a session Dell never saw but heard about, that if they were going to teach the young that terrible things could be gentle, they should not do it with the easiest possible example. They should do it with the hardest. They should bring the young to the animal that had made the whole galaxy afraid, and let them see it be gentle, so that the lesson would be true all the way down and not just true for small safe things that were easy to love. So they came to the preserve, a dozen virile children, pale-plated and soft at the joints the way Ulro had been soft, herded by nervous creche mothers and 3 wardens of the new Corps, and a physician, and Threnu herself, who had flown out from Ancio Reach to stand surety on the directorate's side of a thing no directorate had ever done. They came down to the gold bank of the slow river in the wide warm afternoon, and they were frightened, all of them, the children and the mothers and the wardens both, and Dell met them on the bank with her hands loose and her breathing long, and she did not tell them not to be afraid. "You're supposed to be afraid," she told the children, crouching down to their height, 12 small, pale, frightened faces. That's right, and it's smart, and don't let anybody tell you different. He's the most dangerous animal you'll ever see. Everything you've been told about what his kind can do is true. Hold on to that. She had said it to 7 governments. She said it now to 12 children in exactly the same flat, quiet voice because it was exactly as true. Now come and watch what all that danger does when it loves something. Come slow, come quiet, stay behind me, and watch. She brought them down the bank, slow in the gold light, to where Otto lay in the shallows with his chin on his stone and the old cork ball against his flank. And she knelt, and the children knelt behind her. 12 small held breaths, and she reached out her bare arm, her whole bare arm, the arm 7 governments had watched go into that mouth. And she laid her hand flat on the great slate slope of his skull, between the 2 gold eyes, and she scratched, gently with a smooth gray earth stone, the soft place under his jaw that her grandmother had scratched before her. And the deathworld's oldest killer, in front of a dozen children of the people who had counted his kind's number for 200 years, closed his eyes and leaned, a little, into the scratching, and made, so low the children felt it in the bank more than heard it, a long, slow rumble of an old animal being touched by a hand it trusted, the sound Dell had felt under her own palm 10,000 times, the sound she had never once been able to explain to anyone who had not felt it. The sound of Kudin doesn't at rest. One of the children began, very quietly, to cry, not from fear. Dell knew the difference now. She'd learned it on a lot of faces this last while. The creche mother moved to gather the child up, and Threnu, of all people, stopped her, put out one long, careful hand and stopped her, and let the child cry, and watched the child watch the animal. And Dell saw on the old administrator's face the thing she'd seen on Vaughn's in the hall, the wall coming down, this time not in a man at the end of his career, but in a whole people at the start of something, 12 small pale faces learning, 3 years and 200 years too late and exactly on time. That the number was not the only thing they had to inherit. "Would you like to touch him?" Dell asked the crying child. "Soft. You don't have to, nobody ever has to, but he'll let you if you come slow, and you'll have it your whole life. You'll be old someday and you'll tell somebody, 'I touched the oldest terrible thing in the galaxy when I was small, and it was gentle,' and they won't believe you, and it'll be true anyway." She held out her hand. "Slow, behind me, I've got you. He's got us both, come on." The child came, slow behind her, one small pale plated hand out and shaking. And Dell guided it, the way her grandmother had guided hers on a bend of brown earth water 20 years and 400 light years ago, down onto the warm slate of the sleeping animal, and held it there, the child's hand under her own on the flank of the deathworld's oldest killer, and the animal breathed, and did not stir, and let itself be touched by the child of the people who had feared it most, because the woman whose hand was on the child's hand was one he trusted, and that was enough. That had always been enough. That was the whole entire animal. "There," Dell said softly, "there, now you know. Now you'll always know." They stayed until the gold sun went down behind the reeds, the children and the mothers and the wardens and Threnu, and then they went, quiet, changed, back up the bank toward the transport, and the preserve emptied of aliens the way it always emptied of aliens, slowly, reluctantly, everyone stopping at the top of the bank to look back once at the small woman and the enormous animal on the shore of the slow river. Io stayed. Io and Ord came out most weeks now. The sable drog had grown old too, in its way, and the 2 old apex animals liked to lie on the same bank in the same sun, 6 meters apart, saying nothing, the elder and the one who had learned from the elder, and Io and Dell would sit between them and say very little either, because there was very little that needed saying, and the sun would go down gold over an alien river, and it was, Dell thought more than once, the most peace she had ever known. More than the brown river, more than the years before it all, the deep, unlikely peace of a thing that had come out all right when it had had no business coming out all right at all. "You did a thing here," Io said to her once in the last gold of one of those evenings, both old beasts dozing, the reeds ticking with insects that were not earth insects. I want to make sure you know the whole of it before I am too old to say it plainly. You did not save one animal. You saved the animal, and I am glad of it. He is a fine old terror, and he deserved his river. But that is not the whole of what you did." He looked at her with all four eyes, gray to the muzzle now, patient as he had ever been. "You taught a frightened galaxy the difference between safe and gentle. It did not know the difference. It thought they were the same word. It spent 200 years trying to make the terrible safe, which cannot be done, and calling the failure a promise. And you came off a transport with an old crocodile in a cardboard box, and you showed the whole conquered that safe was never the thing to want. Gentle was the thing to want, and gentle is not the absence of the terrible. Gentle is the terrible choosing. You cannot have the one without the other, and the trying to is what made them all so small." He was quiet a moment. "You will not be remembered for the amended schedule, or the covenant, or the 12 pages, or the diagram of the box with the coffee ring. Those will be remembered, but you will be remembered for the arm. For the moment you knelt down in front of the thing the whole galaxy was afraid of, and put your arm in its mouth, and trusted it, in front of everyone, so that they would have to see what you had always known." He inclined his gray head. "It is the bravest thing I have witnessed in 50 years of witnessing brave things. And you keep saying it was nothing. You keep saying it was only a person giving a crocodile his ball back." "It was," Del said. "Yes," said Io. "That is what I am telling you, that it was both. That it was the bravest thing in 50 years, and it was only a person giving a crocodile his ball back, at the same time in the same act, and that the two were never opposites, and that this right here, the both at once of it, is the whole of what you taught us, and the whole of what he is, and the whole of what your grandmother knew, hip deep in the brown water, when she picked up a hatchling the size of a shoe and decided to be trustworthy and let the animal decide." He settled back on the bank between the two old beasts in the last of the gold. "Both at once, handle or marrow, that is the lesson. The galaxy will be 100 years learning it, but it is learning. And it is learning because a small woman in bad clothes was not afraid to kneel down and be gentle to something terrible in front of everyone, and let them watch it be gentle back." Del didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer to it, and Io didn't need one. He'd said it for himself as much as for her, the way the old say the true things to get them said before they can't. She just leaned back against the warm slate flank of her crocodile, in the last gold light of an alien afternoon, with the old cork ball a hand's width from her hip, where he'd carried it up out of the water to lie near her, mendied and mendied and mendied, gone soft and brown on the canvas. And she watched the sun go down over a river that was not her river but had become, somewhere in 3 years, close enough. Otto lived 9 more years. That is a long time for a man, and not so long for a crocodile. And Del had known from the start that she would likely bury him, the way she had known it about her grandmother's whole long project, the way you know the shape of a thing you have decided to love anyway. When it came quietly, in the gold of a morning, the old animal simply not waking, curled in his shallows around the ball with his chin on his stone, gone the way the very old go when the world has been kind to them at the end, without struggle, without fear, in the warm, near the one hand that had never once closed on him. Del sat with him a long time. Then she did the last thing the keeping asked of her. She did not bury the ball with him. She had thought she would, for years had planned it, even the ball in the grave, the whole thing finished clean. But when the morning came she found she couldn't, and she understood why, and it was the same reason her grandmother had given it to him, and the same reason she had carried it 400 light years in a cardboard box. Because a thing that is loved long enough stops being a thing and becomes a promise, and you do not bury a promise, you keep it, and you pass it on. She washed the ball in the river, she dried it in the gold sun, and she carried it up the bank to the keeper's quarters, and she set it on the shelf where the smooth gray earth stones were, and she wrote a letter to a creche world 3 systems out, to a child who was not so small anymore, who had touched the oldest terrible thing in the galaxy once and been gentle and been met with gentleness, and who had written to Dell every year since, careful pale-plated letters in a hand that got surer as the years went. She wrote, "He's gone. He went easy in the warm near me, which is all any of us can ask and more than most of us get. And I have a thing of his that needs keeping, and I think it should be kept by someone who understands what it is, and I think that's you. It's a ball. It won't look like much. There's a coffee ring on the box. Come and get it when you're grown, and I'll tell you the whole of it, and then it's yours to keep and yours to pass on, for as long as your people can manage to love a terrible thing long enough for it to become gentle. 70 years it takes, maybe more. Start now." The Conquered never did write a rule for what it had seen. It wrote a great many rules around it, the third disposition, the covenant law, the 12 solemn pages, the diagram with the coffee ring reproduced exactly. But for the thing at the center of it, the both at once of it, the terrible choosing gentle for 70 years around a child's ball, past a grave, 400 light-years from the river where it started, for that in the end, the careful frightened galaxy of the Conquered of settled worlds had no protocol, and no column, and no clean determination, and it learned at last to stop reaching for one. There is no rule for it. There was only ever an old animal, a cardboard box, and the one hand in the galaxy it would never close on, and a small plain woman who knelt down in front of everyone and trusted it, so the rest of them would finally have to see. Some things you cannot license. You can only be trustworthy every day for as long as it takes and let the animal decide. He decided. He always did.